Hello and welcome to the RaRa. I actually just finished the full episode, and it went. The thing about it is, it actually went for about 2 hours or something like that. And so I wanted to mention this is going to be a long one, but future shows I'm going to try to keep around an hour 15, maybe like up to like an hour 30, hour 35, something like that, like an hour and a half basically, and that's going to be like my length goal: hour 15, hour 30, something like this. This one went around 2 hours, and I was just talking about all kinds of stuff. The U.S. having the reserve currency. I was talking about things with geopolitics and this and that. I barely got into some other stuff I wanted to talk about, but yeah, just so you know, this is a long episode, but future shows are only going to be like an hour to an hour and a half, something in that range. Just so you know, so you're not going to have to listen through 2 hours all the time or something like this. And so I wanted to mention that. But yeah, I hope that you enjoy the show though, and hopefully it's still entertaining regardless of its length. And like I said, future shows are going to be a bit shorter. So anyhow, that's my little disclaimer. I hope that you enjoy the show, and yeah, and so the real show is going to get started just right now, but I wanted to put that little notice in since I did kind of go pretty long with this one. So cheers everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the RaRa. Hello and welcome to episode number 2 of the RaRa. All right, so here we are. I am in Tulum, and yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I love this town, so it's really a pleasure to be back. And yeah, I used to actually live here for a while, so I'm gonna tell you a few stories about Tulum toward the end of the episode. But it's really nice to be here. And I got here a few days back. Remember, I was in Oaxaca. I was in Puerto Escondido for episode number 1, and that's really beautiful out there. You know, Oaxaca is very mountainous. It's kind of got the Pacific Coast vibes, right? It's got the surfers and the big waves and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Kind of that whole low key vibe type of thing. But now I'm on the East Coast, right? So now I'm kind of like on the Caribbean side of Mexico, which is a completely different thing. It's not very mountainous right here. It's kind of flat, and it's very beautiful though. And it's got some really neat things. It's got the Tulum ruins right on the coast here, and it's a very special spot. Tulum. We'll talk more about Tulum later, but I love it here. You know, it attracts a lot of really interesting people from around the world, and it's got quite the unique energy, you know. So it's really fun for me to be back. And I think I've been coming here for like around 9 years now or something. I came for a few years just for fun, like on vacation and stuff. And then I wound up moving here during the pandemic, right? Like we mentioned in episode 1. And I had an apartment here for about 5 years, thereabouts. And so I moved out of the apartment about a year ago, but I still come back a lot, right? So I think I've been back 2 or 3 times since I moved out. I was here a few months ago, and now I'm here again. So it's always nice to be back. And it's kind of funny though, because I wasn't sure where I was going to film the first episode from. And I had a bunch of places in mind, the second episode, I should say, my first episode in Tulum. And I had a bunch of places in mind, but I wasn't really sure, you know. And I was actually thinking, why don't I film it at a cenote, right? Because cenotes are really neat. It's kind of like a unique thing in this part of the world, and so I went to a cenote today. I rented a bike a few days ago, and so I took my bike down to the cenote, and I was gonna film right there. I was gonna set it up and have the cenote in the background and stuff, but they wound up having a DJ today though, so it was gonna be a bit loud with the audio. So I thought, well, maybe I won't film here. And so then I went to another place called Raw Love, which is kind of like a vegan cafe, and it's a really beautiful spot right in the center of town. But that was kind of busy too. There's kind of a bit of commotion going on and stuff like that. So I thought, all right, well, I'll just come right back to my hotel and I'll film right here. So I'm back at my place, and this is a cool spot. It's called Bufo Avarias, and this is a hotel here in town, and I'll tell you a bit more about it toward the end of the show. But I have this to record, and I think it should be good. Hopefully the audio is all right and stuff like that. Right. And by the way, cenotes are really neat too. The one I went to today is called Vasica, and it's actually kind of close to my old apartment, kind of like on the outskirts of Tulum there. And that one's really neat because they kind of set it up to be almost like a day club, right? Like they have like a deck and some beds that you can rent and stuff like this. They have like a bar there and a restaurant and things like that. So that one's kind of unique. Most cenotes are different. Most cenotes you just kind of go and you can pay a couple hundred pesos and then you can go swimming, and most of them aren't too built up, right? But cenotes, by the way, are very unique to this region. So I think cenotes exist in a few other places in the world, but they're very unique though. I'm pretty sure that they happen when limestone collapses and then it fills in with water. So they're kind of like ponds or lakes, and sometimes you go to a cenote and you look out and it kind of looks like a pond or a lake. It just sort of looks like a body of water, I guess, maybe with some mangroves or something like this. But other cenotes are actually really, really neat because they have a lot of them have caves and stuff too. So some cenotes you go and they have like cave systems. So you can go there and you can kind of, I don't know, be in like the water and stuff and have like a cave right there as well. Sometimes they have underground caves and things like that. I know there's one cenote pretty close by that has a cave and it's got lots of bats. I remember being in there and thinking, wow, this is a wild habitat. There's bats flying all around, and that was really interesting. It was like being in like a bat habitat, I guess. There's bats everywhere, all over the place, and that was a really wild experience actually. But a lot of them have bats. But anyhow, another unique thing about cenotes though are a lot of these cenotes that they have in this region. Like I'm on the Yucatan Peninsula, right, which is kind of like I guess on the east side, southeast of Mexico, and in this area in particular, they have these cenotes, right, these limestone, I guess, sort of like things that get crashed in and filled with water, and I'm pretty sure that's how they work. I'm pretty sure, and anyhow, this area is unique for that. And so one of the cool things about them though are that a lot of these cenotes, like a lot of these bodies of water, are connected underground to each other, right? Because right underneath us in this area is one of the world's largest underground river systems, which is a whole really cool thing. It's very interesting. And so you can actually get scuba gear, and you can, with a lot of these cenotes, you can jump into one of them and, kind of like dive down, and then you can come down one of the underground rivers, and then you can pop up in a completely different other cenote, like somewhere else in the area. And so they're really interesting like that. Not all of them are connected like that, I don't think, but a lot of them are. And so they're pretty cool. And I remember the first time I ever saw a cenote. I think it was my first time here in Tulum, and I went to a party, and then there was some kind of after party going on, so I went to that as well. And the after party that I went to was at a cenote, and I was like, what's a cenote? What's that? And so I show up, and I remember the sun was coming up and stuff. It was super late at night or early in the morning, I guess. And the sun was coming up, and I looked and I saw this like, it's kind of like this pond looking like thing, but it had like a mist coming off of it because it was, early in the morning and stuff. So it had like that morning mist. And I thought, wow, that looked so pristine. And the aura of it was just so pure and beautiful. And so I walked up to it and I was like, wow, that's a cool thing. And wow, that was my first time ever seeing a cenote. I thought, wow, that's really cool. And then I peeked into it and you could see like forever, like way, way down, many, many dozens of feet. You could just see because it was so clear and clean. And yeah, that was my first time ever seeing one, and I thought, wow, cenotes are very cool, And since then, I've always been a big fan. So I thought, well, it'd be fun to film down there, but it was kind of loud and stuff. But maybe I'll take some pictures. Maybe I'll go down to some cenotes this trip or next trip, and I'll try and get some pictures and stuff like that. I think I have some pictures of cenotes on my Instagram, I'm pretty sure. But anyhow, so that's that. But yeah, so here I am in my hotel room, which is kind of strange. I'm used to having an apartment in Tulum, and so it's kind of weird to be in a hotel room here. But here I am, and we'll do the show from here. So yeah, so it should be a fun episode, and we have a few interesting topics to talk about, right? So I'm going to talk about geopolitics. Like some things happening in the world and stuff like that. I'm also going to talk about American politics and economics as well. And then a bit about UFOs, which should be fun. And then we're going to go into maybe a few stories about Tulum after that. And we'll wrap it up with that. So, and I don't think I'm going to have a guest today. I think, we'll have a guest maybe next show or the following show or one of these shows after that. But today is just me. And yeah, so hopefully I can still be somewhat entertaining enough to keep people wanting to watch. So I guess I'll hop into some topics here. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was I wanted to talk a little bit about geopolitics, right, and some stuff happening in the world. And this will kind of help to explain a little bit about where I'm coming from and some of my own knowledge. I didn't take any notes today. I have an empty notebook, and so I don't even know why I have it here. I guess I can write notes, but there's none here. I do have my computer there. I think I got a couple of quick little things jotted there, a couple of brief things that I wanted to mention throughout the show, but that's pretty much it. I'm kind of just going off the top of my head here with this episode, and that's kind of how I like it, though. That's sort of what I want from the RaRa. I want to do this Friday thing and kind of have it be a bit spontaneous and fun and stuff like that, and not too rehearsed and scripted and stuff. So some of the stuff, yes, like sometimes if there's important things I want to talk about, I'll probably take some pretty some pretty serious notes and stuff, but today I thought I'll just kind of give a rundown of some of these topics, and I won't dive too deep into them, right? I'm not gonna go too heavy into any one of them, really. I'm just gonna kind of give some baseline knowledge about some of this stuff so we can get an understanding of some of these things that are happening and some of my own perspectives and things like that. So as far as geopolitics goes, so let's start off there. So when you look at the world, there's a lot of things happening, right? It's the world. It always kind of blows my mind to think of all the things happening all at the same time. Like for example, if you zoom out from the planet and you just kind of like if you were just sort of fly up in the air like a bird or something, and kind of look down at all the stuff that's happening, it's sort of mind blowing as to the amount of things that are happening. For example, right here, just in this, I guess, hotel, there might be like, who knows, maybe 15 hotel rooms or something. But most of those hotel rooms have people in them, and those people are all doing different things, right? Like somebody might be taking a nap, another person might be getting ready to go out. I'm here doing a podcast, and there's just so much happening just in this space. There's bugs walking around, there's, insects and stuff flying around and things like this. There might be a snake out in the garden, like, there's just so much happening at any one time in any one place that it's utterly mind-blowing, not even to think about all the microscopic things that are happening within your body. So everything is constantly in motion, and there's constantly a quadrillion things happening at the same time. And so when I talk about geopolitics, I am only talking about a few examples of things that are happening in the world, but every country has stuff going on. Every town has stuff going on. There's internal politics that are complicated everywhere. I'm just sort of scratching the surface with a few somewhat important things, sort of just to kind of give like a brief outline of some of the stuff that is relevant as to what's happening today in the world. Sorry, I got off on a little bit of a tangent there with the mind-blowing stuff happening everywhere. But that's a crazy thought, though. I've thought about that before. Like if you zoom out and you kind of look in, it's just like this world has so much happening at any one time. It's no human brain can actually contemplate it, to be honest. It's beyond our ability to sort of completely understand or contemplate. But anyhow, going back to geopolitics, so some of the things that I wanted to mention were just a couple of the situations that are happening in the world that are important to take note of. First of all, I'd like to say that generally speaking right now, if you were to look at how countries are aligned with each other, you can kind of break the world into two major factions, right? Now, you could look at this from many different perspectives and see it, and from many different ways and things like that, but generally speaking, right now, the world is kind of divided into, I guess, two main coalitions. Let's put it that way. There's, I guess, the U.S. side, which is generally speaking more capitalist and stuff like that. And then there's, I guess, the other side, which would be like, I guess, China and Russia, which are generally speaking more leaning toward the left, things like this. And then you have a bunch of other countries that are kind of on one side or the other. And some of them are very neutral as well. Now, like I said, I'm really simplifying things right now, and there's a lot more complications to it than just this. But generally speaking, if you were to look at things, you can kind of break it off into these two groups. Now, I guess the side the Chinese bloc, and the Russian side that you can look at. You'd have countries like China, which have their own system. It's like I guess it's a communist government, and they have like their own way of doing things. And you have Russia as well. Now Russia is historically, Russia and China haven't always got along quite well because they're neighbors and stuff, and they're two powerful countries right next door to each other and stuff like that. But right now they're kind of united mostly against the U.S., I guess you could say. And then you'd have some other countries that are sort of allies with them, like you'd have Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, Iran, places like this. Other countries that have joined the BRICS movement, like South Africa, Brazil. Brazil isn't always on their side. I mean, it kind of depends who the leader is. A lot of these countries, it depends who the leader is, as far as to what side they're kind of on at the moment. Like a lot of countries in the world are divided politically, just like the United States is, just like many countries are, and so it matters who's in power in a sense, as to what side the country is currently gravitating towards. For example, you could have a country like we just mentioned Brazil, right? Their former leader Bolsonaro was mainly like kind of like a U.S. supporter, right? He was sort of on the side of the U.S. and now they have what's his name, Lula, I guess, right? He's in there, and he's kind of left leaning, right? He's sort of more of like I guess in opposition to the U.S. in some ways, and so and that's just happened, depending on the leader that was elected there, it kind of the country can go either way, and a lot of countries are like that, by the way. So the United States is kind of unique. So I mean, on the United States side, you'd probably have most of Western Europe, although some of the countries in Western Europe have kind of been a bit wonky with their support lately. But you'd have most of the Western Europe, countries like Israel. Saudi Arabia was historically on the side of the U.S., but now they're somewhat neutral, I guess. They're kind of playing both sides a little bit, but and you'd have places like Australia as well, Canada, the obvious, the Western world, I guess you can say, would be like the U.S. side. And right now, when you look at some of and again, I'm simplifying this, and I don't really think that the world should be viewed in this way. Like we are all humans. We are all of the same ilk. And, I think that when we look at humanity, we should look at it in a way that we're all humans, and we do have these, somewhat arbitrary lines, these borders that divide us, and each country, has their own flag that they wave, and everyone gets patriotic in their, a lot of people get patriotic in their country. There's nationalism in every country, which basically means that they're supporting their own country and go our team type of thing. But at the end of the day, we are all humans, right? And so when I talk about some of this stuff, we're talking about these political divisions and things like that, but I do so in a sense where it's not the main thing, right? Like when I look at humanity, I want to think like we are all on one team essentially. We are all of one. I remember when I went to China. When I went to China, it was the best trip of my entire life so far. And I've been to I think over 40 countries or something at this point. A lot of these countries I've been to several times. There's still a ton of countries I need to go to. But I've traveled a pretty fair amount. I think I was counting the airports. I think I've traveled in and out of over 100 airports at this point or something like this. Pretty fair amount of traveling. But the best trip of my entire life to this day is when I went to China. I taught English in China when I was in college, and I just kind of got lucky. I was playing rugby. It was funny. I went to the bus. I saw a thing at a flyer at a bus stop, and it had little tabs to rip off, and it said, "Want to go to China? Want to I think it said want to see panda and eat real Chinese food and something else. I forget what it said, but see the Great Wall or something like that." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds interesting." So I ripped the little tab off, and then I put it on my desk, and I just kind of kept it at my apartment at UMass, and didn't really. I was like, I gotta reply to that. I gotta give them a call or something, and it just kind of sat there for a couple weeks. And then I remember one day it was a Wednesday, and I was going to rugby practice, and it was dog day or something. It was on Wednesdays I played rugby at UMass, and the rugby team was wild. We had some fun adventures. We used to have games and stuff, and during the games, after each game, you'd meet with the other team, and the two teams would drink together, right? So you'd beat each other up on the field and stuff like that. Like if we were playing the University of New Hampshire or something, we would go up to UNH in Durham, and we'd play their team, and we just destroy each other on the field. It's very, very brutal sport, very hardcore, contacts, very contact sport where people are running into each other and all this kind of stuff. But then after the game, we'd go out together with the team. So we'd usually go to their house, or if they were in Amherst, they'd come to our rugby house, and we'd drink with the other team. So we'd get a keg and we'd all drink together and sing songs, and we'd have all these crazy things like where you'd have to drink out of a shoe if you'd have to drink out of your cleat, like you'd have to take your shoe off and drink a beer out of it if you messed up the song and stuff like that. So rugby was really fun. I have lots of cool rugby stories. When you scored your first try, your first point in the game, you'd have to do something naked. So you'd have to get naked, and I remember with some of the guys, one time a guy had to run across the street and get a stick of butter from the gas station after he scored his first try, which is kind of like a touchdown in rugby. So it's lots of funny stories. Oh my, I had so many funny stories about that time. But yeah, it was a classic time of my life. But anyhow, I remember one day I was at the bus stop, and it was a Wednesday, and I was gonna go to rugby practice, and I was running on the last minute, and I had a bunch of stuff going on. I think I had some homework to do, and I was like, I'm not gonna go there today. It's just I never would skip practice and stuff, but this one day I was like, I can't. It's a lot. I had a lot going on, and so I wound up not going to practice that day. It was a Wednesday, and so I went back to my apartment. I looked on the table, and then I saw the little thing that I had ripped off the flyer a couple weeks back, and I said the go to China thing or whatever, and I thought I'll give it a call. I'm not at practice today. I stayed home or whatever. Let me give them a quick call. So I gave them a call, and they were like, today's one of the last days that you can apply. She was like, I'm really glad that you called because, we actually ended the applications for the China trip a few days back, but I'll let you come if you come to my house like right now, like this afternoon, and you come over now and we'll have a quick talk, and if it seems like you could be a good fit, I'll let you submit an application, something like this. And so anyway, so I ran over to her house, which was right kind of close to where I was staying off campus, and I met her, and I met Bufang. She was the girl, and she was kind of like organizing this Chinese trip. Her dad was like the principal of the school. It was a private school, and she told me that they only needed 3 people for the Chinese trip. They already had 3 people picked. They had an instructor that taught English. They had like another guy that was like working at UMass or something, and he was like he spoke like 7 languages or something. And then they had another guy that they found, and so she was like, we already filled the 3 spots. But you seem interesting. You seem like maybe you could work out. Fill out an application. We'll see how it goes. So anyhow, I filled out an application. I sent it in, and she called me back a few days later, and she was like, I got some bad news. We're not accepting you for the trip, but thanks for applying. And it was a great trip, by the way, too. This was a 3-week trip to China, all paid for by the school. If I were to be accepted, I would be teaching English for 3 weeks. You basically taught English for 2 weeks. And I didn't speak any Mandarin or anything, but I would have been teaching pronunciation to, I guess, like junior high school age kids. And anyhow, and so I was really excited to go. I was like, I can go to China, a free, totally paid for trip. And then the 3rd week, you get to travel all around China. So they show you the Great Wall. They show you like, a million different things. And the Forbidden City, like all these kinds of stuff. And anyhow, I was so excited. I thought, this would be so cool if I got this, if I were accepted to this. But I knew they had already picked 3 people, and I was, I felt like the odds were very, very low of me getting in. And so she called me, and she's like, sorry, we didn't accept you. And then she goes, just joking, you're coming to China. And I was like, what? I'm going to China? And so that summer I wound up going to China, and it was literally the best trip of my entire life so far. I taught these kids, and after teaching them each day, like the kids would bring us around, they'd show us around the towns, and like we would just go around and walk around with all these, kids after teaching them all day English and stuff. They'd bring us around, and we'd be playing instruments, and it was just such a fun time. The food was amazing. Every day they'd have a amazing breakfast, amazing lunch, amazing dinner, all you can eat. We would drink baijiu. We would be drinking they'd pour us baijiu, which they called they called it wine. They were like, yeah, you want to have some wine? And it was like rubbing alcohol. It was like the strongest stuff in the world. You drink it, and it was like, I don't even know, like 120 proof or something. And you drink it and like boy it was strong, but we drink that and sometimes we'd drink a lot of it and we'd be all partying and stuff, and it was just such a fun trip. um, but yeah, and wow, yeah, I remember probably my favorite moment from that trip was when we were leaving all these kids that we had taught for like the last couple of weeks and stuff. We became really close. We became really close to these kids that we were teaching. It was just me and two other guys, my friend Kurt and this guy Paul. We were the ones, and the guy, I guess the other guy that the third guy that they had before me, she didn't accept him. She kind of booted him out of the group, or she took me instead or whatever. I think it was because she had a crush on me, and we hit it off pretty well. Me and Bafeng became really good friends, but I felt so bad though. I think I took the guy's job who had like he knew like 7 languages or something. I didn't know any other languages at the time. I know some Spanish now, but that's about it. And and so it was an interesting thing, but I got super lucky, I guess. But anyhow, I remember my favorite moment of that trip was when I I the train was leaving. All the kids came at the very end of the. And I have a million stories about this trip. I mean, one time we went to a village, and I stayed in like this like little tiny village in the middle of nowhere, and that was the first American, like Caucasian type of person these people had ever seen. So they were like looking at me like I was like a ghost or something. Like it was wild. Way off in the middle of the Chinese countryside. I think it was 11 hours north of Beijing by train. We went to Shifeng. It was a wild time, but anyhow, my favorite moment of the trip was when we were leaving on the train, and I looked out and I was waving goodbye. And I remember Brian was one of my favorite kids. He was one of my favorite students, and Brian was waving goodbye, and I was waving goodbye to Brian, and I had tears in my eyes, and they were saying goodbye, and I was like goodbye, and like the train was leaving, and I saw those little kids, all that the little kids that I was teaching for the last 2 weeks, all waving to me, just kind of like everyone was tearing. Crying, bawling her eyes out and stuff like, and I never saw them. Obviously I haven't been back there, so it would be really fun to go back. I was actually thinking about emailing Brian and seeing if I could get back in contact with him, but anyhow, I'm going off on tangents here, but yeah, I had going back to, I think I was talking about rugby, and then I was talking about the China trip, and then I kind of forget what the heck I was going into. I guess I got to be better with reminding myself of what I was initially talking about here. But anyhow, yeah. So going to China was the best, to this day, the best trip of my life, and I wound up being there because I had skipped rugby practice on a Wednesday. So I guess that was my story. But yeah, and so good times. So yeah, I guess going back to the geopolitical thing, so yeah, you have China, is kind of like leading one coalition, I guess you can say that. And on that side, like I said, you have kind of like Russia, China, North Korea, I don't know, Venezuela, Cuba, these kinds of countries. And then you have places like South Africa and some others that are kind of like veering toward that direction. India is kind of somewhere in the middle. India is a BRICS nation. BRICS, by the way, is BRICS. It's Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. India can kind of go both ways, but anyhow, you kind of have that coalition on one side, and then on the other side, like I said, you have the American coalition, which is kind of like the Western Europe, Australia, places like this. Israel, I guess you could put in there. And those are kind of like the two, I guess, geopolitical sides of the world right now. And like I said before, though, I remember why I got off on that tangent. We are all of one village. We are all of one humanity, right? And the reason why I got off on the whole story about China was because I remember the headmaster, Bofeng's father, he was kind of the principal of the school that I taught English at. That I taught English at to the Chinese students. I remember one of the things, actually the only thing, he said a lot of really wise things, but the thing that I really remember the most of him saying was that we are all one village, right? And I remember he was talking about the U.S. and China and all these different countries and how we're all different, and we all have similarities, but we all have differences, and we all have our own interests and everything else. And then he was saying, we are all of one village. We're all one. We're all humans. And I remember that really stuck with me. I remember it resonated with me. And it's funny, now I'm thinking of all these stories from China. But, I remember thinking like, yeah, that's a really profound kind of notion, and I really feel like that's true. And I think sometimes we look at divisions, we look at these different countries and stuff, and we see the different flags flying, and we think, oh, they're there, they're I don't know, they're German, or they're Spanish, or they're from Uruguay or whatever. And we look at them as almost being different groups, but at the end of the day, we are all of one village, and this village is planet Earth, and and so I like to keep that notion in mind when we talk about this stuff, because I don't like to have these arbitrary lines and these borders be so divisive, right? I mean, I'm telling you about geopolitics, but I think underlining the whole thing, we should kind of keep in mind that we are all humans, and we all we have way more in common than we have that separates us. I know too, like sometimes when I look at some of these things, like when I look at passports, right? Like I went to Cuba, and Cuba's a beautiful place too, and I love it there. The architecture, the history, the music, the just everything, the food, I love Cuba. It's beautiful, beautiful place. The people are so warm. I tell people the warmest places I've ever been are Cuba and Ireland. Those are, in my opinion, those are the two warmest, just inviting countries. I mean, everyone in Cuba would just be so kind to me and just so open and warm. Same thing in Ireland. I've been to Ireland, I don't know, probably 4 times or something like that. Every time I go, it's always fun. A lot of times I go out by myself. I'll be in Galway or Dublin, and I'll go out, and I don't even need to bring any friends. I can just meet friends. The minute I get out to a bar, people start talking to me. Oh, how are you doing, lad? Oh, you're from the States, are you? Oh, have a Guinness with me, this kind of thing, I remember one time I went to Dublin, and I was in a hostel. I was staying at the Generator in Dublin, and it was my first Guinness of the whole trip. I went to sip it. I got the Guinness, and I went to sip it, and this guy said, "That's not a real Guinness." I said, "What are you talking about?" By the way, please don't mind. Please, excuse my terrible Irish accent here. I am Irish, by the way. My ancestors are Irish. On my dad's side, 100%. I'm not 100%. I'm like 50%. On my mom's side, it's like English and French, I think, and a little bit of Native American Indian, but which is a wild story. But I'm mostly Irish though, and my dad 100% Irish, right? So my roots are from Ireland largely, and so I really resonate. I really kind of connect with Ireland, and I love Ireland. And anyhow, I remember I was taking my first sip of Guinness, and he said, "Oh, that's not a Guinness. I'll show you a Guinness if you want to see a Guinness." And I was like, "What do you mean it's not a Guinness?" And he said, "Well, because something having to do with the taps." He said, "Yeah, they don't pour enough of it or something like this." And something like that. I think it had to do with the taps not being like, they didn't manage them as well as they could have, as like a proper Guinness bar manages them or something like this. And so so I took a sip, and he said, "No, it's stale. It's not the same as a real good Guinness." And I said, "All right." And he said, "Hey, if you want, come out with me. We'll meet." I think he said, in a few days. I think it was like, he said, "Come out on Tuesday or Sunday." I forget what the day was, but he said, "Meet me at this bar at like 5 p.m. at this bar. Meet me here, and I'll show you a real Guinness." Right? And I said, "All right, you're on." So I showed up a few days later. I just showed up. I was by myself. I show up to this bar, like somewhere in the town, and it was like a real Irish bar. I show up, and I show up, and I say, "How are you doing?" And he was there, and we shook hands, and he said, "Oh, now I'm gonna show you a real Guinness. I will." So he asked the bartender to pour us both a Guinness, and we start sipping Guinnesses, and yeah, it was beautiful. So I got to have some real solid Guinness there, and so anyhow, so that was kind of a fun thing, but excuse me, they're both very warm countries, and again, I'm forgetting how I got off on that tangent there, but talking about Ireland and Cuba and stuff, but yeah, so anyhow, so Cuba is another country, I guess, that is aligned with China and things like this. But when I was there in Cuba, I remember going back to the story, I remember, it was a beautiful trip, and I had lots of fun adventures and stuff, but I remember meeting a new friend, and it was pouring rain out. I was in Havana, and I was getting ready to go on my flight, actually. It was my last day in Cuba. I had been to a few different places. I went to the south. I went to a few different beach towns and stuff. Was it Trinidad? I forget exactly the places I went to, but I have a lot of good pictures from there. But it's so scenic. It's so photogenic. Anyhow, I went, and it was pouring rain out. I had my backpack and stuff. I usually travel with one backpack, and I had my backpack, and it was pouring rain, and I had a flight a few hours later, so I'm walking around, the outskirts of Havana, and this guy came up to me and he said, "Hey man, come on in, come in my house. You know, it's pouring rain. Come keep dry and stuff." And so we became friends. And I haven't talked to him in years, but anyhow, he invited me in, and he was talking about his story. Right? He said he's from Cuba, and he said in Cuba it's it's very hard for Cubans to travel, right? Because they have a Cuban passport, and it's one of those countries that it's kind of tricky to travel with a passport. It's not like the U.S., where if you're born in the U.S. and you have a U.S. passport, you can travel almost anywhere. I mean, it's one of the top ones in the world. Places like Japan or Canada. A lot of these countries have really good passports. They're accepted in most places. You don't need a visa in most places. But in Cuba, in a lot of countries, like in Venezuela, many countries that are not, I guess, on the top of the, I guess, geopolitical hierarchy, it's very hard to travel. And that kind of broke my heart. I thought, you're a human, I'm a human, but I'm born in the United States and you're born in Cuba, and I can easily travel to most places. I can go to Western Europe without a visa. I can, go to Australia, get a visa, I think on the internet I think it just takes a few minutes, like an instant visa. I don't know if they still have it like that. You want to go to India or something, I think it just takes a couple of days. It's fairly simple. But if you're a resident of Cuba or some of these other countries, some of these countries in South America or Africa and lots of places in Asia and stuff like this that aren't affiliated with the United States and things like that, it can be very difficult to get a visa, and so or even to travel to some of these other countries. And so I thought, that's heartbreaking. We're both humans, and depending on where you're born kind of gives you like a much either better or lesser chance to be able to travel. And travel is such an awesome thing. It's one of my favorite things in the world. So I can imagine if I were born in one of these other countries, how I would feel and what I would do. And my friend in Cuba actually did get to travel a lot. He kind of, broke through the system a little bit, and he was able to kind of get a passport and to go and get out and to travel and stuff. But he said it was very hard for a lot of his family to travel, and most of his friends and family had never left Cuba, which is a pretty relatively small island. It's a gem of an island in the Caribbean. It's just such a beautiful place. It's one of the most beautiful islands in the world. But they could never, a lot of them hadn't left that island ever in their entire lifetimes. And that really kind of broke my heart to hear that, to hear how difficult it could be to travel. And so now when I look at this, the whole thing that's happening in the world, I look at us as being humans. And I think we should all be able to travel freely for the most part. And we should be able to go to other countries and experience them and just, regardless of where you're from. And that's kind of where I come from. But at the same time, I see that we do have a geopolitical system happening with, countries at odds with each other politically and economically even, and things like that. So, so sometimes we have lots of different situations happening. And so when you look at the geopolitical spectrum or the geopolitical, I guess, alliances right now, you have kind of like the China-Russia-led bloc, and then you have the U.S.-led bloc. Generally speaking, I know I'm kind of maybe overly simplifying a little bit, but when you look at these kinds of two, I guess, groups, it's kind of in a way becoming a bit of a multipolar world in a sense. After World War II, it was mostly a U.S. Dominated system. Now other countries have sort of risen economically as well. So now we have other countries that are becoming pretty powerful and things like that too. And if you look at if you look at some of the situations that are happening, like if you look at Taiwan, that's a kind of a hot spot of controversy in a sense, because you have Taiwan, which basically, long story short, China had a civil war, and the nationalists, like I guess the right-leaning side of the civil war, wound up fleeing to Taiwan, which is like an island off the coast of China, and China still considers that to be part of China. I remember when I was in China, they actually had an office for Taiwan in the assembly that I went to, like the government assembly, but Taiwan never goes there. Taiwan doesn't consider themselves part of China. Taiwan, the island off of the coast of China, considers them an independent nation. They consider themselves independent, where China thinks that it's still a part of China. And basically what happened during the Civil War, with the right-leaning nationalists fled to Taiwan, and there's a whole history to this and how it happened and how they lost the support of the people and how the communist side gained the support, and there's a whole history that I won't go into. But generally the the left leaning communist side stayed in the mainland China, and now they are in Beijing, and they are kind of like, I guess, what most of the world considers China. Like, so when you have a diplomatic meeting with China, you meet with Xi Jinping, right, who's the leader, and you do so in Beijing, I guess, right. And so now there's a big thing about, is China going to retake? Is mainland China going to retake Taiwan? Like, what's going to happen there? Now, Taiwan is supported by the United States. Now, the United States has a one China policy, saying, like, if we talk to China, we only talk to Beijing. We don't consider Taiwan to be the true China. That's on paper what they say. At the same time, the United States heavily supports Taiwan. The United States gives it lots of arms militarily. The United States has said, like, if China attacks Taiwan, then the United States is going to step in. And they have something called the porcupine strategy, which means that they're going to make Taiwan such a prickly place to invade that if China did invade, then Taiwan could put up its porcupine spines, and cause some trouble for China. So anyhow, so you've got these kind of divisions happening in China. Again, the United States is backing Taiwan, and China wants to take Taiwan, but it's not able to do so right now because the United States, largely because of the United States' influence in that region. And one of the main reasons why the United States is backing Taiwan is because of semiconductors and things like this. First of all, it's a strategic place to have a stronghold, but secondly, they have a huge percentage of the world's semiconductor production. And so semiconductors are used in many electronic devices, cars, computers, all kinds of stuff. And so the U.S. wants a steady supply of that. They don't want China to control the semiconductor supply, because then China could shut it off, and they could say, okay, we're going to stop the semiconductor trade going to the U.S., and that could essentially shut down U.S. A lot of the U.S. Manufacturing with computers and cell phones and you name it, anything with high technology uses semiconductors for the most part. So anyhow, so the United States doesn't want China having that leverage over them. And so you have that situation happening over there, and that's a huge point of contention between the United States and China. Then you have what's happening in Ukraine. Now, what's happening in Ukraine is largely between the West and that coalition that we talked about before, the China-Russia coalition, I guess, right? Now, in Ukraine, it's a totally different situation. Now, if you look at the media in the United States, you'll see that they generally say, Russia's the bad guy in that situation, right? They'll say, yeah, Russia invaded Ukraine, and that's kind of it. And the United States is there to help Ukraine and this kind of thing, right? Which is pure American propaganda, basically. Like, when you look at the American news, once you step outside of the United States and you see other news sources and stuff, like if you look at RT, which is that one's kind of like Russian state news in a sense, but but if you look at the Russian news, or if you look at some of these other countries and stuff, they have a very different perspective than the U.S. news has. And so in the U.S. they say, yeah, Russia's the bad guy. It's Putin's a dictator who wants to take over, Eastern Europe and things like this, and but in reality, that's not really the case. I think what mostly happened was in Ukraine, and again, this is very simplified, but in Ukraine, you had the country being sort of split, like part of the country, especially towards Kiev. Now, I'm not sure how you say that. I forget. There's like a Russian way to say it, and like a Ukrainian way. Kiev. I don't know exactly. I forget which one is which, but so I apologize if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. I don't mean to offend any Russians or any Ukrainians. I'm just trying to give a neutral perspective from here. But anyhow, you had essentially, and I'm way simplifying this, and I might not get it completely right, but generally speaking, you had Ukraine. Kind of at odds. You had sort of the western part of Ukraine by Kiev, or Kiev, however you want to say that one. You had that side kind of pro-Western, wanting to join the European Union and things like this, where you had the eastern side, especially along the Donbass and the area right along the Russian border, very pro-Russian. And stuff like this. A lot of them would speak Russian and things like this. And so you kind of had the country divided on those lines in a sense. And they had a leader, again, I'm not super knowledgeable about this history, but they had a president that was pretty pro-Russian. Long story short, some years back, I think around 2014, the United States kind of came in and helped to form a coup, essentially, that they ousted the democratically elected leader that was pro-Russian. They got them out of there, and they violently installed a new leader. That was pro-Western, that was pro-U.S. And I'm not saying that it was 100% the U.S. that was doing this. I mean, there was a whole, political situation there happening in that country, but the U.S. was largely supporting this military, or not even this, I guess, violent coup that took out the leader and disposed them and put in this new Western-aligned leader. And since then, that the whole thing happened with Crimea, where Crimea decided to leave Ukraine at that point, and they voted to leave Ukraine and to become part of Russia. So Russia took Crimea, which is a huge strategic place to have, right on the sea there. And is it the Black Sea, I guess, right? Yeah, it's right on the Black Sea, I guess. If I'm getting some of this stuff wrong, I apologize. If it's not I think it's the Black Sea there. But yeah. But anyhow, Russia took that, which is a huge strategic location. Crimea is a really beautiful place. And then they had this whole civil war happen basically after that. And they had, on the Ukrainian side, you had militias that were largely trained by the United States, and they were harassing the Russian side. And they kind of went back and forth. And some of these militias were pretty bad news bears. They were pretty hardcore. Anyhow, they went back and forth, and then eventually Russia decided to step in and basically protect the Russian-speaking part of Ukraine that was at odds with the militias that were pro-European, pro-Western in Ukraine. And so it wasn't just that Russia decided to come into Ukraine willy-nilly and say, hey, we're going to invade you and take you over. It wasn't really that. I think Putin apparently probably did want to take Ukraine. I think they wanted that for a long time because Ukraine was historically part of that whole area, of the Soviet empire and stuff. I think that's where they actually stored the nuclear weapons and stuff like that. But anyhow, there's a whole history to that region, and maybe Putin did want to go in. Maybe that was, a big thing for him to retake that territory and stuff. I don't know, but it's what I'm saying is that it's a lot more complicated than just Russia just coming in and out of nowhere deciding to take that territory. I mean, they were almost provoked in a way into doing it. Basically, what was happening was when this whole struggle was going on between the western part of Ukraine and the eastern part of Ukraine, the pro-European side and the pro-Russian side, eastern being the Russian side on the border of Russia. When this whole thing was happening, Western leaders were saying that NATO is the military alliance between the United States and Western Europe. And they were saying that basically NATO was going to be able to come into Ukraine, and that maybe Ukraine could even join NATO, which I'm not sure is a real realistic thing, but they were saying that that's a possibility. And that really bothered Russia too, because Russia didn't want NATO, which is the US-led military bloc, coming further, closer and closer to their border. NATO had already been moving further and further for years, closer to Russia. NATO basically started as like a way to prevent Russia from moving westward, but NATO, it was more of like a defensive kind of military alliance with European countries and with the United States and stuff like that. What happened over time, though, NATO kind of became stronger and stronger, and they wound up letting more and more countries join. I think the Balkans and I think some of the other countries there in Eastern Europe joined NATO, and NATO became bigger and bigger and bigger, and NATO got closer. The United States and European military alliance got closer and closer and closer to Russia over the years. And so I think Russia was saying, hey, NATO keeps getting closer, and we don't want NATO right on our doorstep. We don't want to. It's kind of like the United States having Russia, I guess, have military relations with, let's say, like Mexico or Canada right on the United States' border. Russia didn't want the United States having military alliances with the countries bordering Russia, right? So the United States, so Russia wanted to keep NATO out of its neighborhood, and I think that's very reasonable. And anyhow, NATO kept getting closer and closer to Russia, and I think that's kind of a lot of what provoked this war here, this Ukraine war. A lot of it had to do with NATO coming closer to Russia, and Russia basically drawing a red line and saying we don't want this, and that's, I think, a lot of the reason why they invaded. And so it's not so black and white where Russia was bad and Ukraine was good. It's a lot more complicated than that. And again, I'm giving a very, very, very simplified version of this here. And I'm not justifying anything on the Russian side. I'm not saying who's right or wrong. I'm not saying, I mean, Russia has a lot of problems. Russia has, I think one of the lights went out there, but we're fine. Russia has a lot of issues with different things. Russia is no angel. A lot of these countries have a lot of issues, but so I'm not supporting Russia. I'm not saying Russia's always good or anything like this, but you have some of that stuff happening. And so anyhow, so that's another thing that's happening. And the United States has been giving lots of arms and stuff to lots of money to Ukraine, which they basically buy American arms with, and so it spent a lot of money on this conflict, and it's there's a lot of business interests in it as well. A lot of businesses are wanting this war because they want to invest in the land after the whole thing is settled and stuff, and so you have a lot of outside groups wanting this, I guess, I don't know, industrial military complex to kind of come in and have a war. So there's a lot of like money to be made from these companies because of the war, which is a terrible thing. Not only that, but a lot of the reason for the United States being involved in the Ukraine war is they were trying to diminish the Russian military forces, which again is another terrible thing. You have to look at things as being from the side of humanity and not from the side of from these I guess nation states that happen to be at odds because of this reason or that reason. We all have to look at each other and say, listen, you're a Ukrainian, you're a human being, like you're an American, you're a human being, you're a Russian, you're a human being. Like, let's all try to come together and not have these foolish wars. Like, let's settle our differences on the soccer field. Like, let's, let your soccer team play our soccer team, and that's how we'll take out these grudges, not with bombs and missiles and everything else. And I think the United States has tons of amazing things about it, right? I mean, we've got freedom of speech and a million things. The United States, when I say America, I know there's South America and North America, but when I say America, I generally mean it in the context of the United States. And America has so many amazing things. I love America. I am an American. This is my home country. And I want it to succeed. I want it to do well. And we have so many wonderful things. I think people take it for granted, actually. We have so many freedoms that other countries could only dream of. And I'll talk more about that stuff in future episodes, but I want the United States to succeed. I want it to do very well. But when I see the United States doing bad things, that's when it gets to be, not so good. And I want to call those bad things out. I don't want to just, be gung-ho and wave the flag, yay, Star Spangled Banner, red, white, and blue, regardless of what the United States does. I want to be critical when I see things that it's doing that's bad, both domestically and internationally. If it were up to me, the United States has, 700, 800 military bases all around the world? We have bases, and when I say we, I mean the United States, not me. I'm a taxpayer, so I guess I'm, in a way, funding these bases, but, we have bases in Germany, we have bases in South Korea, we have bases in all over South America, and all over the world. And why do we need all these bases? I don't know. It's an empire. Is it worth it? I don't know. The United States right now is over $38 trillion in debt. And before we go into the debt and the American stuff, let's finish with geopolitics. We talked about Ukraine. We talked a little bit about the Chinese, Taiwan situation. What's happening in Iran right now is really wild. Israel is, I don't know if they're kind of coercing the United States to join their fight, and to, some of the people want to expand Israel and stuff, and that's a whole quagmire with Iran and everything. That's maybe something we'll talk about in another episode. And again, I'm not taking sides on any of this stuff. I'm not taking sides with the United States or Ukraine or Russia or Iran or Israel or any of these countries. I am being relatively neutral. I'm on side human. I'm on side being, I'm on side being, not even human, just being. I'm for beings and beings being well and thriving and doing good and being on the side of peace, and not just peace, but being on the side of creating an environment where we can all enjoy it and we can all make the best of our lives and cherish this thing, this life that we have, and cherish this trip, this journey that we call life. I'm on the side of that. I'm not on the side of this team and this team over here. It's like now, it's like you have these wars, and it's like, you have these people that in another lifetime, in another circumstance, they could have been best friends, right? You have, this case where one country is fighting another country, and these say that you get these two guys and they're trying to kill each other. Well, their sons might be going to college together, and their sons might be best friends in another. It's like these divisions that cause these wars are, a lot of them are so petty, and we tend to get on these trips where we're like, oh, I'm an American, yay, forget everyone else. And some people say, well, no, I'm from Chile and I'm the best. And people say, I'm from China, I'm the best. I'm from Japan, I'm the best. And everyone kind of gets on their own team and, demonizes the other. And we don't need to be doing that so much. I mean, in some ways it's good. In some ways you need to be proud of your country and proud of your society and your culture and your civilization. And you need to, do your best and I don't know, and love your team, right? And all this kind of stuff. But you don't want to demonize people so much. You don't want to, have it come to the point where you're killing each other. And this is silly stuff that everyone knows this, but I think now, especially when you look at these, these situations around the world, I mean, you look at these different wars, like Ukraine is basically a proxy war. It's a proxy just means like a smaller war between two larger powers. So it's basically, Ukraine is like a smaller proxy war. It's really the United States versus Russia, right? And Ukraine is kind of I don't want to say, I mean, it's kind of the victims in all of this. Like, Ukraine is fighting for the United States essentially, and Russia is fighting for Russia. And it's a terrible thing. People are dying. I forget the numbers, but there's thousands of people dying every week. It's absolutely awful, and it should not be happening. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. And what's going on in Iran is also terrible. Terrible. The stuff bombing, these places, awful. I'm sorry, but it's awful. It's awful. And anyone who's gung-ho about bombing other countries and, going to get on the side of, of yay, go our team and forget everyone else is being misled. And I think they know that deep down in their hearts. It's not a good thing to do. I mean, sometimes maybe war is unavoidable. Like, sometimes maybe that's the last option and stuff like this. But I don't know. I feel like a lot of these wars are avoidable, and a lot of these conflicts are simply, a lot of them just don't need to happen. And a lot of them are happening because of shady reasons. They're happening for reasons that aren't so just, and some reasons that are just simply for business interests and things like this. And so we have to be very careful about supporting these types of military excursions and stuff. Like I said, the United States has all these bases all over the world. And is that really helping us? Is that helping the United States? I don't know. I mean, the United States is using its power in other ways too. We have the CIA and groups like USAID and stuff like that. And basically, the United States goes into countries and it does a lot of stuff. It basically bribes politicians, essentially. It tells them, okay, we're the United States. We're going to come in here and we're going to essentially say, side with us to a president or to a prime minister or to some sort of leader, dictator, whoever. There's basically two types of political systems. There's a leader, an autocrat or a dictator, which is elected, they're not elected. They're just in power because maybe maybe they got there from a military coup, or sometimes it's like a king or a monarchy. Maybe that's a heritage that got them that position. But you basically have leaders that are not elected, right? Whether it be a king or some sort of autocrat or dictator or totalitarian leader. These are all just names for someone who's not elected. And then you have, on the other side, you have people that are elected. You have, which is done democratically. And sometimes it's done democratically with a representative system, so that the people are like you'd have like a parliamentary system where the people elect leaders, and then the leaders choose the actual president or prime minister or whatever you want to call it. But either way, you either have direct democracy like you have in the United States, where the people directly, you have the electoral college, so it's not quite direct, but you have the electoral college actually elects the president, based on what states, what the people vote for in each state. Then the electors from those states vote for the president, but technically, but anyhow, generally speaking, you either have a democratic system or you don't. You have a king or a dictator or whoever else. What the United States a lot of times does, and what any major power does when they have a lot of money and influence and stuff, is they go into a lot of these places and they essentially say, okay, side with us, and if you side with us, we'll give you lots of money through USAID or whatever other group, and if you do that, great. We'll pay for your schools. We'll pay for this. We'll pay for that, and everything else, and we'll support your political campaign and things like that. If you don't side with us, we might support your opponent. We might even just take you out of power. And if they take them out of power, then that's it. And now they're out. And so they have a strong incentive to side with the United States. The United States also does a lot of things. It's not just the United States, by the way. Powerful countries do this to countries that aren't so powerful all the time. But you have other countries, doing this too. But a lot of times, countries like the United States go into another country and they essentially buy off their media, right? So they put in pro-U.S. media, and maybe they sometimes buy off the judicial system and stuff like this. And and so you wind up with a lot of these countries that are very pro-United States or pro-West because they're heavily incentivized to be that way. And that's kind of like, a softer way without using like a military to sort of influence other countries and to get them onto your side and to support you either politically or militarily or economically. A lot of times that helps the United States get their businesses in there, and the businesses can, extract the resources, or they can make money there and things like that. And I'm not saying that it's all shady. Like I said, I'm an American. I care about the United States. I'm pro-America. I want it to succeed, and I want it to do very well. But I think that, sometimes we as a country have done some things that are unethical. I think sometimes we go into places and we try to run their whole systems, and maybe it is very beneficial for the United States to be able to get resources from these places. But I think sometimes it's unethical, and I think we should be a lot more mindful of how we operate. But anyhow, I got off on this little tangent here because with the United States, sometimes you do have situations where they're going into these places and they're doing things to get them on their side and stuff like this. But I won't talk too much more about that. But we have all these bases all over the world, and and we're spending all this money all over the world with influencing this country and influencing that country and doing this here and doing that there and trying to help this election with this leader and this one and all this crazy stuff. And it's like on some level, it's like, are we really helping ourselves? I mean, the country is $38 trillion in debt. And yet it still spends and spends and spends. And, and the reason why we're able to do all this stuff is because the United States has what's called the world reserve currency. And so the world reserve currency is basically when people are using the dollar, right? So people use the dollar because it's a stable currency. When you look at, the dollar, the Fed spends like crazy. They print money like, they've printed lots of money over time, and there's lots of inflation. But it's still probably the most stable currency as far as fiat currencies go. And so people use the dollar, right? And, it used to be backed by gold. You used to be able to trade in your dollars for gold. But then when the United States learned that a lot of countries, not people couldn't do that, but central banks could do that. So with the United States dollar, basically, when you have, I guess when we talk about world reserve currencies, right? You have a lot of currencies in the world. You've got the dollar from the U.S., you've got the euro from Europe. And that one is a whole bunch of different economies using the same currency, which is very messy. You have some economies that need some things, some economies like that need other things, and some spend a lot, some are very frugal. And so that's kind of a messy situation when you have one currency for many different countries, many different cultures, many different economic systems, well, similar economic systems, but many different ways of spending money and stuff. Like, that's kind of a bit messy. But then you have some other currencies like the yuan, and there's a bunch of other ones, and some countries within Europe have their own currency too. You got the Swiss franc and stuff like that, but the pound, the British pound, and among all the different currencies, generally speaking, the dollar is thought to be the most stable. Generally speaking, there's reasons for that. The main thing is because people need dollars, right? Historically, we've needed dollars to buy oil because the United States, I think it was in the 70s, they made an agreement with Saudi Arabia, which had a lot of oil for sale. They said, listen, if people want to buy your oil, make them buy it in dollars, right? And so that kept the dollar in demand. It made it so if Japan wanted to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, Japan had to get dollars to buy it. Japan couldn't give the Japan currency. They had to get American dollars to buy the oil. And so there was incentive for a lot of these countries to have, and it wasn't just Saudi Arabia. There's other reasons for this too. That was one of the reasons. But there's a lot of incentive for for other countries to use dollars, right? And so dollars have been, let's say for, I guess since around Bretton Woods, like since around World War II, I guess, the dollar has kind of been the world's reserve currency. Now, with that said, when you're the world's reserve currency, that has some implications. So basically, it means a few things. So it means that countries are going to want the dollar from around the world. So if you're in Russia, you want dollars. Maybe not so much now because they were kind of removed from the banking system, from the Western banking system. But generally speaking, Russia would want dollars. Chinese people would want dollars. People in Korea would want dollars. People in Sweden would want dollars. A lot of these countries would want dollars because they could buy oil with it, or they could keep the dollar as a reserve. Like they could buy U.S. bonds, Treasury bonds, and that's a pretty safe way to store Well, it's safe in a way. I mean, that you can store your money in U.S. bonds, and it's pretty stable. They're backed by the U.S. government. They give a relatively small interest rate, which, by the way, is sometimes under inflation, so you're actually losing money with those. Sometimes you're losing money if you hold dollars too. Like if you just put dollars like in your any currency, any fiat currency. A fiat currency, by the way, is when a country creates their own currency. Right? So it's when a central bank, we have the Federal Reserve in the United States, we created the dollars, right? And so that's what a fiat currency is. Before fiat currencies, so there's lots of fiat currencies that I just talked about, right? The euro, I don't know, the whole bunch of the franc, whatever, I don't know, the whole bunch of fiat currencies, all created by the central banks of their own countries. Before fiat currencies, people would trade in, a lot of times in like currencies that were either backed by gold, or a lot of times they'd actually trade in gold and precious metals. I mean, for a long time, gold has been the main, I guess, currency in the world in a way, because gold is very unique. Gold is almost indestructible. Like if your house burns down and you have gold there, it's gonna still be there. You know, you can go salvage it. Gold, you can melt gold. Like you can put gold into a coin and you can melt it and then put it into another shape. You can make it into a necklace and then melt it again and put it into a ring and melt it. You can just keep melting it, and then it still retains its structure and stuff. It's still gold. You can burn it and melt it, but it's not going to be destroyed. It's not also going to be destroyed by rust either. So you can have gold in your boat or something, and it can sink to the bottom of the sea. It can be, touched with water for years, and while all the steel in there and everything else is going to rust and disintegrate, the gold will stay good, and the water won't hurt it, right? So gold is like somewhat indestructible. I mean, you could destruct it, I guess, if you put it into like a plasma filter or something, blast it into the sun. I guess it would be destructive. But gold is very, it's relatively indestructible, and for the most, in relative terms, and not only that, but there's relatively small amounts of it. So gold reserves in the world are, I think they're relatively known for the most part, and they mine gold, but there's not a whole lot of gold that gets brought out every day, and so basically gold is unique because it's a scarce thing. It's limited. There's not a whole lot of gold in the world, and so that makes it a good store of value, right? And gold is also, like I said, it's kind of indestructible in a way, so that's kind of a unique thing about gold, where most other things I should say will get destructed over time. Like if you have wood, or if you have fabric, or most metals will rust. Wood will rot and wood will fall apart. It'll, in 20 years, if you have a block of wood, unless it's petrified or something, but if you have like a block of wood, it's just going to disintegrate. Or it can burn. If you have a fire, the wood burns up, right? Its fabric gets ruined over time. It, becomes kind of just beat up and worn out, and eventually it will just kind of fall apart. And lots of things, plastics. I guess plastics can last a long time, but plastics are not rare though. Like you can make plastics, or a dime a dozen. Piece of plastic is very cheap, but gold's very rare. So it's not only is it indestructible, but it's very rare, right? There's not a whole lot of gold out there, and so those are kind of the things you need for a currency or for a store of value when it comes to like metals and things like this. And silver's kind of like that too. Silver's used in a lot of products as well, probably even more so than gold. But But yeah, and that's why gold has been such a store of value, because it's rare. You don't have a lot of it, and it lasts a long time, and it's just been throughout the world. If you go to Asia, or if you go to the Americas, or if you go to Africa, gold has always been something that's accepted as being a valuable thing. Whereas in the past, you'd have different versions of money, right? Like you might have shells, or you might have rocks, or salts, even, or in Roman times, you might pay your soldiers in salt or something like this, right? All of these other currencies, or all of these other things that we would use for money. Money, by the way, is simply just one person or one group saying that something is valuable, and another group or another person saying, okay, that's valuable. It's both agreeing to a thing having value. That's what money is. Money can be made out of anything. A dollar is made out of, I guess it's like paper, right? There's like a certain kind of paper that they use. Some currencies, the euro and stuff like that, are made out of like a plastic. Money can be any material, but it's basically an idea. It's saying that this thing has money, has value, and it's people believing that. Like if tomorrow, if everyone said that, say if the United States federal government fell or something like that, then and the dollar was, people lost faith in the dollar, then it wouldn't be a very good money anymore, because it would inflate and it would just become worthless. Like people would just say, okay, it's a dollar was maybe worth $1 today, and maybe tomorrow it's not worth $1 anymore. It's worth like less than $1, because it's people aren't using it so much. They don't trust it anymore, and so it's like its value goes down. It's people don't want to give it value anymore, right? And so anyhow, so money is just, it can be anything really, and you just basically, it's something that is declared to have value, and throughout time, and you need to keep it scarce, right? So like so central banks, they can't, if they go and they just print money all day and just give $100 bills to everyone, it will be worthless at that point. So you have to have, like, say in the case of the dollar, you have to have it actually be like retain its value. So you can't just that's why the central bank, the Federal Reserve, can't just go and print trillions and trillions of dollars and give everyone thousands of dollars and millions of dollars each, and now everyone's rich. You can't do that, because now the currency will actually have no value. It'll just become worthless, and a car will go from being $10,000 to $10 million. If everyone in the world had $1 million, then a car would be like $10 million or something. These aren't real numbers, but you can't just give people a bunch of money and then try to fix a situation like that and make everyone wealthy, because then if everyone is a millionaire, then no one's really a millionaire. It kind of raises the level of what wealth is. And so now you go to the grocery store, an orange is now $3,000 or something like that. So, you know what I'm saying? So the prices rise with how much money is in the system, really. And that's really what inflation is. Inflation is when you inflate the money supply. You create, the Federal Reserve or a central bank creates currency, and that puts currency into the system, and then all the prices tend to go up. And that's inflating the current. That's where inflation comes from. Oil prices, energy prices can be inflationary as well. There's other ways that inflation can happen, but when energy prices go up, everything tends to go up, because energy is like a baseline that everything kind of needs. So you have stuff like that too. But anyhow, long story short, that's something that you got. And so right. And so anyhow, so money is a store of value, and or money is, I guess, a currency. Gold is a store of value. Money is a currency, meaning that it can be exchanged for goods and services, and we all trust that it has value. We say, okay, $1 is worth this, and €1 is worth that, and it's this kind of thing. And so so with the case of the United States has the world reserve currency, right? So everyone wants the dollars, because the dollars, it's very stable. It's not like some of these other currencies that are like, one day they're worth this much, and the next day they're worth that much, and then the next day they're worth down here, and then they're kind of bouncing around. The dollar is relatively stable. And the reason why it's been stable is because the Federal Reserve, they've been printing lots of money, but the world has been absorbing that money, right? The world has been basically taking that money in, and we haven't had the inflation that we would have otherwise. Because if a country like Argentina prints, like this happened in Argentina, they had inflation with I think they call it the peso there. They printed a whole bunch of money, and the Argentinian peso, I think it's the peso, I could be wrong on that. If it's wrong, I apologize. But the Argentinian peso is not demanded all over the world. Like if you go to Egypt with an Argentinian peso, you can't just go and buy stuff in Egypt with a peso, right? They're probably not going to accept it. I keep saying peso, but I might have that wrong. Looks like we're on 1%. So all right, so I'm gonna pause this, and we're gonna come right back to the thing. Okay, I'll be right back. All right, so we are back, and it was funny because I noticed that my phone here was on getting toward like 1%, and I saw it at like around 5, and I was like, oh, maybe I have some time to finish, and then it was 4 and 3, and then it hit 1. I thought, all right, I'll cut it and charge the battery, but it was actually really good timing because right when I turned off the right when I stopped the recording, I looked at the time, and I was actually just on the very last minute for my CrossFit class. So I ran over to CrossFit. I took the bike over there, my bicycle, and had a really sweet CrossFit session. It's an hour long workout, and I love CrossFit. I go a lot, especially when I'm here in Tulum. I love just like getting in there and getting a solid workout in. If I do that like 4 or 5 times a week, I feel super nice. And yeah, I just love it. So I thought, I'll do that, and then I'll come back and finish up the episode. So we had a bit of a late start today. Usually I think I'm going to start these episodes, like I'm probably going to record them like either the day before or sometimes probably a couple days before, but depending on the scheduling and stuff. But I think most episodes I'm probably going to do the Friday, the day of, most of the time. And I think I'm going to start doing them in the mornings, like early, like around 10 a.m. or something. That way I can post these episodes. I'm going to shoot for like about a 4 o'clock posting time, 4 o'clock p.m. So this one, our second episode, we're kind of getting in a little bit late, but it's all right. I'll get on it. I'll get onto like a schedule with it, and it should be pretty good. But yeah, I love going to CrossFit though. It's so much fun. Like I actually enjoy going. Like it's not like the gym where sometimes I go to the gym and like I'll be there for a couple hours and I'll barely break a sweat. I'll just be kind of like on the, working with the machines or using the free weights. But I don't know. Sometimes you kind of go at a slow pace and you're not that motivated. Whereas with CrossFit, you go in for 1 hour and it's super intense for that hour. So I like love it. I like look forward to going to CrossFit. The gym, not so much. I kind of like, I got to go to the gym, But CrossFit, I love. Like high intensity workouts, I really like. So that was cool. And then it was great though because I went to CrossFit. And I go to CrossFit Tulum here. It's an awesome gym. If you're ever in Tulum, check it out. You can actually do day passes. I think it's 400 pesos for a day pass or 1,000 pesos for a week. 2,000 for a month, I think, unless they changed those prices recently. But anyways, I went into CrossFit, and my friend Bruno was there from Argentina. He's one of my buddies from here in Tulum. He's from Argentina, though. And he was like, yeah, I checked out the podcast. I listened to one of the episodes. I said, what? You listened to the podcast, man? It meant the world to me, It was really, really special of him to say that. So I was really stoked. And yeah, he thinks it's going to be good. He really liked it. And so that really meant a whole lot to me, It's like, I feel like I have like 7 listeners and he's one of them, But we'll grow. I hope. I don't know. We'll see. But who knows? We might end up with like 8 listeners by the end of this. Who knows? But we'll see how it goes. But yeah, so that was cool. And then I wanted to mention a couple of other quick things. Yeah, so I am using my phone. So if you noticed that earlier, I was saying that I was on 1% and stuff. But it's not like a shabby setup, though. I don't, I'm not just like plugging in my phone and hitting record with like the native camera app or something like that. I actually have a professional app that we're using. And you can see all the levels and stuff, the audio levels and the exposure levels and all this kind of stuff. You can set it to different settings with the recordings, with the recording quality and the frames per second and all this kind of stuff. So it's actually a really great app for recording. And so I'm using that. But tech is a really cool thing, by the way. Like right now, a lot of us have in our pockets a device that can do lots of different things. Like, you can pull out your phone and you can get a direction somewhere, or you can instantly call someone on the other side of the world. You can look up the sports game and watch a live broadcast of like your favorite soccer team or something. These are things that were thought to be like almost magical like 100 years ago, so like technology has just come so far, and it's just kind of magnificent as to what we can do with it. And so we're going to talk much more. Technology is something that I'm really into. Especially like emerging technology, like things like age reversal and stuff like that. So we're going to talk a lot more about biotech and technology in general in future episodes. I'm not going to really get into it now, but I wanted to mention that about tech because I didn't bring my phone with me to the gym. I just plugged it in because I was on 1%, and so I plugged it in to get some nice battery here. But it was funny because I was riding the bike over to the gym, and I realized like, wow, it's kind of weird to not have your phone, it's kind of how it was before. It's like if somebody wanted to meet you back in like the 1970s or something. Say you wanted to meet your friend in a city. You're going to New York City and you're going to meet in Manhattan. Say, okay, I'll meet you at Times Square, right on like this street and that street, on 42nd and 8th or something like this. At exactly noon, right? And they both agree to this time, one person and the other person. They say, I'll meet you at 42nd and 8th at noon in Manhattan on Saturday afternoon. And they both go, and one of them doesn't show up, right? One of them isn't there. Well, what's the person who showed up going to do? I guess just wait, right? And then if they wait a half an hour, 45 minutes, and they still don't show up, what do? I don't know. I guess you just go home or something. You start asking people where they could be or something like that. But you can't just message them with a text or give them a quick call or anything like that. Back then it was like you didn't have a way to communicate unless you were like on a landline at home. And landlines are even pretty new as well. Landlines are relatively a new thing. I mean, way back, it's like you had to send a letter across, if you wanted to communicate with somebody, you'd have to send like a letter, and like a horse would have to take it across, a vast distance and stuff. And maybe it arrives, maybe it doesn't arrive, maybe it takes 2 weeks to arrive, who knows? You have to send it on a boat if it was going to go overseas, and so communication has completely changed. But we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff in future episodes and things like that. And by the way, I happen to be wearing my Standard shirt, so I came straight from CrossFit right here. I didn't even stop. I just rode the bike, parked it, and restarted the episode. So I used to work at the Standard. I think I mentioned that during episode 1, but that was like my favorite job ever. I was like bar back, and bartended a little bit too, but I worked in the beer garden there, right? So we used to go after the shift. We'd always go to the Brass Monkey, and the Standard's great. It's got the rooftop. Laban is on the roof. If you go to this, if you're in New York City, go to the Standard Hotel. There's 2 of them. I think there's one in the East Village now, but there's one in the Meatpacking District and kind of like the West Village area. And that one's the one that I worked at. That one has the beer garden at the bottom, and a few other things too. It's got like the Standard Lounge at the bottom, and then up at the top they have a place called Laban, which has like kind of like a big jacuzzi, I guess, and it's like a beautiful nightclub, and you can see the Statue of Liberty from there, and it's right on the river, pretty close to the river, so you can kind of see like the the water and stuff, and you can see a beautiful vista of downtown Manhattan. And then also at the top there's the outside area too, so you can actually go like outside onto the roof, and they have these big glass walls that block the wind. But they have a really nice bar up there, and that is like, in my opinion, that's the best view that I've ever seen in New York City. So I just love going up there. Every time I went up there, I would just be humbled. I'd be like, whoa! I'd walk up, get off the elevator, and walk up and be like, and just see that view of New York, and just like, wow, that's wild. It is such a cool view. I love the Standard. It was a great place. I met tons of great friends. That was my favorite job ever that ever like clocked in somewhere. It was so much fun. I just had such a great time. I feel like where you work has a lot to do with who you're working with, and we just had such a good group of friends back then, and it was just really special. So if anyone's watching from the Standard, shout out to you. Love you guys. Miss you. And so a couple of other quick notes I wanted to mention here. I remember I talked about the bats. I was thinking about these things on the bike ride back here. I talked about the bats and the cenote. That was really cool, but I didn't really emphasize about how cool it was. Like I remember when I was riding on the bike back here and stuff, I thought I should mention the bats again, because when I was in the cenote, that one that had all the bats and stuff in the cave, it was really wild being in their habitat. Like that was like their world, there were just bats lining the roof of this cave, and they were just flying all around right above your head. I mean, they were only like maybe 20 feet up above your head, but they were like right up there flying around and stuff. And you could see them, and you just look up and you see a bunch of bats everywhere. They're on the roof, they're hanging upside down, and they're flying everywhere and stuff. And I mean, I guess one could hit you if it. I think they have like the sonar or whatever it is. I forget how they see, but or how they like they have like the pulses that come out and stuff. And I think that's how they judge their distances and things like that. But anyways, bats are crazy cool, and they make like these really kind of eerie, kind of like really unique sort of bat sounds. Like it's like these little like high pitched noises and stuff. And so like when you're in the cenote cave, this one was almost like enclosed completely by a cave. Like it was like a big cave, and then there was like a hole at the top, and there was just bats everywhere. But some cenotes are not like, a lot of cenotes are not like that. A lot of them don't even have caves. Some of them have like a half a cave. Some of them don't have caves at all. But this one had a cave, and there was bats, and you went down there and it was just, you were like in Bat World at that point. And so I was riding back on the bike and I was like, yeah, I talked about that earlier, but I didn't really like go into it so much. So that was one of the most unique experiences of my life as far as being like in like a wildlife habitat, you know, in like another creature's like world. I was like in Bat World and it was like really interesting. Yeah, but it was quite the trip. Couple other things I wanted to mention too. Like I like to be on point. I was coming back on, and I'm crossing these things off my list. I was coming back on the bike, and I was like, I should mention that I love to be on point. Like that's why I really wanted to make CrossFit today, because like I love just kind of like waking up, getting a good start to the day, getting my things done, getting my music done, getting my writing done, my film stuff in, my business stuff in, my podcast stuff in now, and just kind of like being on point and being on top of my task and like feeling good with my body, with my mind, spiritually, you know, with my relationships as well and things like that. I like to like have things like, you know, be like, I like to like run a tight ship, and sometimes I don't. Like sometimes I've kind of fall off and I make mistakes and I fall a bit behind and stuff, and that's when I don't feel so good. So today when I hit, you know, a stop on the record thing and I realized that it was getting close to 7 o'clock, I thought, all right, I'm just going to run down there. Even though it's kind of taking a break from the podcast and stuff, I thought, oh, I'll just come back. I'll still be wearing my CrossFit gear, but that's all right. And so I wanted to mention that. The reason why I actually mentioned that is because I think in the first episode we were talking about psychedelics a lot, and me and Marcelo were joking around about drinking beers and stuff. And I love to hang out and have really fun times. I mean, sometimes I stay out all night, or sometimes I pull double all-nighters. I think I pulled triple all-nighters at some point. But you know, but I'm not like a crazy party animal. I'm not doing drugs all the time, and like, you know, I kind of despise laziness. I despise like waking up super late and like not getting things done. I hate wasting time. I hate like, I don't know, like I get resentful. I get really upset when like someone comes into my life and like I start like doing bad things. Like I start like waking up late and like not getting my stuff done and like wasting time, and I'm like, where did that day go and where did this day go? And you know, I like to like be on point and like get my stuff done and feel good about myself. And not that I'm always like that. You know, I take plenty of time off. I have plenty of fun and stuff. But like, I'm just telling you how I like to feel my best. And I say this, the main reason why I say it is because I was talking a lot about psychedelics and stuff. And I don't want to give the impression that I'm like some kind of crazy party animal who doesn't care about being responsible and getting stuff done. That's the opposite of who I am. Although I do think psychedelics and a lot of these things can be very beneficial, mentally and otherwise, spiritually. Sometimes I think they can help in lots of ways. And I think, you know, substances can be fun recreationally. I'm not advocating to do illegal things or anything like that, but I think that you should be able to put into your body whatever you want, as long as you're responsible and safe and not infringing not hurting the well-being of others, really. I think some of these places, when they, you know, have legalized some of these substances, like we'll talk more about substances and psychedelics and stuff in other episodes, but I'm a big advocate for psychedelics. I've volunteered for Zendo, which we'll talk about these in other episodes, but there's an organization called MAPS. It's based out of Santa Cruz. My friend Rick Doblin founded it. It's so cool that I get to call him my friend. Like he's just such a great guy, and he's so funny because MAPS, by the way, is like the organization that is trying to legalize psychedelics essentially and different substances for medicinal and recreational purposes. But MAPS has been huge with like getting MDMA getting MDMA going forward with helping with trauma and stuff like this, which is a huge thing. It's really a breakthrough therapy with traumas and things. They've also been big with psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, and you know, with getting that to be more accepted in society and to be used for medicinal purposes and things like that. But MAPS is great. It's run out of Santa Cruz, and I volunteered for Zendo, which is a part of MAPS. Zendo is a group that we would go to like festivals like Burning Man or Lightning in a Bottle or Envision in Costa Rica. I did it at all three of those. But anyhow, we would basically have like a tent, and we would be in there, and I learned how to do this. I learned how to be like a professional psychedelic sitter or a professional psychedelic assister or something, if you want to call it that. And so if somebody were having like we don't call it a bad trip, we call it a difficult trip. If somebody were having a difficult trip and they were to come into the Zendo, say at Burning Man or at Lightning in a Bottle, which is a festival in California, or Envision, which is in Costa Rica, or any of these other festivals, if somebody was having a difficult trip and say they took too much, you know, peyote or mushrooms or whatever, acid or something, whatever they took, let's say they took a bit too much, or maybe they weren't in the best state of mind, maybe they were at the stage with their friends and they were dancing, but they started to not feel so good or whatever else. Well, rather than them going to the hospital or them going to the security tent or something like that, they would just come to the Zendo, and we'd be on the same radio as the security, as the medic team, and we'd all work together. And so the medics or the security or whoever it may be would bring that person, as long as they didn't require immediate medical attention. They would bring that person to the Zendo, and we would sit with them and kind of ride out their trip with them. So that way they could be in a safe space and be sitting with somebody who's there to care for them. So, for example, if somebody was having a difficult trip, say they were tripping out and they were like, "Oh, there's purple elephants everywhere, man. I don't know what's going on." Well, their friends could say, or the security could say, "Hey, come, let's go down to the Zendo, and you can sit there with the people and the sitters in the Zendo, and they'll sit with you and they'll relax with you." It's open 24 hours throughout the entire festival. I think it even stays open a little bit past the festival in case somebody is having a difficult trip at the very end. And anyhow, they can sit with us, and we'll sit with them and calm them. And we don't try to help, like try to fix their trip. We just try to ride it out with them. I would tell people psychedelic trips are kind of like, you just kind of have to ride out the storm, essentially. Like, you're probably going to be fine. You're definitely going to be fine, most likely, unless you somehow ingested way too much of something. But medically speaking, in most cases, you're probably going to be fine. You just have to kind of ride out the storm. And psychedelic trips, when you start to fight them and you don't want them to happen anymore, they become very difficult. And the way you have to kind of look at it is almost like being like a boat out at sea. Like, your boat can't sink. It's unsinkable. It's a perfect vessel. It's going to stay afloat. But the waves are going to come and they're going to hit it, and there's going to be wind blowing and you're going to get washed around. But as long as you just chill and relax and know that it's going to be okay, you will ride out the storm, and that storm will pass. And that's how I tell people, your boat is tip-top shape. It's sturdy. It's a solid vessel. It's going to be just fine. You're going to be all right, but you just have to kind of ride out this psychedelic trip. And sometimes they last a long time. Sometimes they last several hours. Marcelo, my friend, remember in the first episode we talked about when I was talking with my friend Marcelo, he accidentally ate like a whole bunch of cookies that had drops of acid on them, and he wound up tripping. I think he said for 26 or 30 hours or something like that, which is a long time when you're tripping. He had a whole crazy story about it. He went out with his friends, and he has a whole story about it, and a lot of it was very humorous, but it can be dangerous too. If you're in a state like that, so you have to be very safe. You have to be very careful. You can't just go out and drive or do something silly. You have to be in a really good state, and you have to be I think if you are taking some of these substances, it's very wise to be with somebody who can care for you, and especially if you're doing it for like medicinal purposes or spiritual purposes, and mental health and things like that. It's always good to do it in the right setting. I would never advocate for somebody to do these substances if it weren't in a safe setting, and if they weren't able to do them in a safe way. And again, I would never advocate for illegal activity. So, so be safe with whatever you do. But I do think that they should be, I don't think that anyone should tell you what you should or should not put in your body. Let's put it that way. I think that's a fundamental freedom as a human being. But we'll talk more about that stuff later on. And I also wanted to mention too, a couple of other quick things. I mentioned the word propaganda. I'm crossing these off my list. I mentioned the word propaganda earlier in the show, and I said that sometimes in the United States we have what's essentially propaganda, kind of like the American version of propaganda. And I made a joke the other day. I think I posted on social media, like if you're watching media in the United States, you're probably about as brainwashed as a 1950s Soviet soldier, And I was making a joke, but it's kind of true, The American media is very biased in a sense. I mean, it's telling the story from an American perspective. But the word propaganda kind of gets thrown around. Media is generally told from a perspective, right? And so if you watch RT, which is Russia Today, you watch the Russian version of reality. You watch this is the Russian perspective. Let's put it that way. If you watch Fox News, you're watching the conservative American mainstream perspective. If you watch CNN or MS Now or NPR, then okay, now you're watching like the, I guess, left-leaning American perspective. All of these media outlets have their own perspectives, and sometimes I think when we don't agree with one of a perspective that we see, we just call it propaganda, and we say, oh, they're just full of nonsense, and it's just propaganda. And I call it American media I implied, or I said that it was kind of, a lot of it is kind of propaganda. And what I meant by that was it's telling a very one-sided perspective. Let's put it that way. And I don't think that the media is out to hurt people. Like, I don't think that they are consciously telling lies. I think that most people in the media are trying to be respectable journalists. I think that most reporters are trying to adhere to the whole point of being a reporter, which is to dig up the truth. I think most of them are trying to do that. Although I do think that, some people, I've had this conversation with some people, and other people differ. They don't agree with me. They say, no, 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 they're just telling lies blatantly on purpose. And, I think that the American, maybe the people in the CIA or different groups in the State Department and stuff they do, I think, try to influence media in other countries and in the United States, for better or worse. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons why independent media is such a great thing right now. I mean, you can go on X or some of these other platforms and you can see independent perspectives that aren't skewed by, by outside influences. Like, for example, with a lot of these mainstream news channels, CNN and things like that, a lot of them, they have advertising. They're not state-run per se, which is a good thing, right? If you're a state-run media, then the government's essentially dictating what you say, because that's how your funding is from the government. And so you're kind of, sort of inclined to give a perspective that's, I guess, showing the government in a positive light. Whereas, I guess, a more free market system, you'd have these different media outlets not necessarily run by the government, but they need to get funding somehow, so a lot of them will get funding from advertising. And that can also be bad too, because, I mean, in the case of, like, say, CNN or something like that, a lot of times companies like pharmaceutical companies will spend a lot of money on advertising on CNN or Fox News or these other stations. And when you're getting a lot of your advertising revenue from, let's say, a pharmaceutical company, well, I mean, I think chances are you're probably not going to be all that critical of that pharmaceutical company, right? And so you might not criticize things like vaccines or other things like this, So I think the media can have some issues. I think that, but I kind of felt a little bit bad about saying the word propaganda, because that's maybe not the greatest word to say. The Americans have a perspective, let's put it that way, and it's a valid perspective. All perspectives are valid. And so, when I was talking about Ukraine and Russia, I'm just trying to give you some things that I see. But I'm not really taking sides with this stuff. Like, you'll know if I take a side. I try not to sugarcoat things. I try to be extremely honest. I can keep things in. I can keep things very private. I'm not going to say everything that I think, but I say the vast. I mean, I'm a pretty open thing with this, which leads me to another point. I hope that people who do see this don't get too upset. I am being pretty open, and I hope that the powers that be don't think that I'm some sort of negative thing and that I'm out to hurt them, or I don't know, spread information that might be detrimental to their agenda or something like this. And so I would ask these people, if there are anyone out there that say, oh, I don't like that guy, I don't like RaRa, I don't like what he's saying, come have a beer with me and let's talk it out, and let's not, please don't hate me, or please don't try to shut down the RaRa or something like that. Let's try to work together and figure out ways that work for everyone. That's kind of the goal here, is to treat each other with respect, and to kind of work through things, because we're all humans at the end of the day, and we're all trying to have fun times. And even if we're not humans, even if you're some sort of gray alien or some lizard creature, I don't know what's out there, but if you're some kind of other entity that's conscious watching this, or or experiencing this reality here, I hope the best for you as well. Like, I hope the best for all the things out there, and I guess there's always going to be conflicts of interest and stuff, but I really don't want to hurt people, or I'm not out to hurt anyone. I'm not out to give people a hard time and to destroy and things like that. I'd much rather see good things come, and for all sides to hopefully win. I want wins on all sides, I hope, and I'm not trying to be some sort of wishy-washy pacifist or something like that. I have my own opinions, and some of them are very strong, and I do care about the well-being of the United States, and I care about a lot of things, and that might be at the detriment of others. I don't know, but generally speaking, I'm not trying to hurt others, and I do care genuinely about the well-being of other people, even if they have other opinions than me, or if they're on other sides than me, if they don't agree with me politically, and things like this. By the way, if anyone's listening to this on audio, I'd say to check out the video because I meant for the RaRa to be a video program. I'm putting it out on audio just because I mean, why not, right? I just kind of submit it and it goes to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and places like that. But it's kind of meant to be a video show. So I mean, it doesn't hurt to listen to the audio though. But I don't know how the audio comes out because I know that I'm kind of I'm presenting it like a video show. So hopefully the audio is good though. Hopefully it's still really good. I mean, you're not missing much. You're pretty much missing me sitting in a chair talking. So, so if you prefer the audio, have at it. But I say, hey, check out the video too sometimes because I do try to make it nice. I'm gonna try to show some areas that I'm in and stuff like this. So yeah. So I wanted to mention that too. So anyhow, those are just a few things that I wanted to mention before we continue. And I'm only gonna go for a few more minutes, I think. But but I wanted to bring those up, and I know that when we left off, we left off talking about currency, and when it comes to currency, just to kind of simplify everything, currency can be anything. Like I said, it could be rocks, it could be shells, it could be anything really, but it has to be scarce. You can't have a lot of it. You can't say, okay, we have a whole rock, there's rocks everywhere, or sand. You can't go to the beach and say, I'm going to use sand as currency, right? Because there's so much of it, everyone would be it's worthless, really. I mean, okay, I want to buy a pint of orange juice. Okay, give me like a pound of sand. Well, you can just go to the beach and just pick up a pound of sand and just give it to them, and so it's worthless. Anyone can do that, and so if you have too much of something, it can't be a currency because there's just too much of it, and it becomes worthless at that point. And so it has to be scarce. So you'd have to go to a beach with just a little bit of sand, like a tiny bit. And maybe you could use sand. If you were in an area that only had a little tiny bit of sand and everyone gets a grain, now it's valuable because now there's only 1,000 grains out there and each grain is worth something. Like it's not like you have 10 million grains of sand and each one is worth like almost nothing because there's so many of them. Does that make sense? So like there have been other cultures in the past that tried to use shells or something as their currency, right? And they'd use shells. And maybe shells, it was hard to find shells in this area, right? Maybe there's a tribe, right? And it's really hard to find this type of shell. So they'd say, okay, there's one type of shell, we're going to use that as our currency. And if you bring that, like that's worth something, right? It's scarce, it's a beautiful shell. There's only like a few hundred of them or something like that. So if you have one of these shells, it's worth something. Okay, and if you bring it to the store, you can trade it for a sheep, or you can trade it for a piece of cheese or whatever else. It's worth something, right? There's only a few hundred of these shells out there, and they're beautiful looking as well. And maybe they're really hard, so you can carve with them. They have like a use. Sometimes currency actually has a use. Like gold has a use. You can use gold as jewelry, or you can use it in electronics. And it's not that makes that good or not. I mean, that can also be a bad thing because if it has too many uses, now it can become much more in demand, and it can actually inflate the price of the currency. It can bring up the price of the currency artificially because people need it for things. So it's not necessarily good that it has uses, but it's good that it's scarce. So gold is scarce. You can't just go outside and find gold. It's hard to find gold. You can go outside and you can find shells, you can find sand, you can find rocks. Those aren't good currencies because you can go out and just find them. And so it's worth nothing, really. Anyone can find them. So anyone can go to the store and say, hey, I got 1,000 shells, I got 1,000 rocks. And what's that? Oh, there's a million more rocks right outside. Who cares? But if you go and you say, I've got a piece of gold, well, gold's not everywhere. It's hard to find. And so it's valuable. It's worth something. It's something that's hard to get. Right? And that's kind of really what makes gold valuable is its scarcity. I mean, it's relatively indestructible, but its scarcity is what makes it valuable. Now, if there was like a meteor that hit or an asteroid or something and it had 1 billion tons of gold on it or something, gold would be worthless. Or if somebody found a mine and the mine had like 1 trillion tons of gold and all of a sudden there was gold everywhere all over the country, gold would be worth nothing at that point because everyone would have it. And so why even bother having it at that point? I mean, it's too, that's why like things like plastic or something wouldn't be, I mean, first of all, plastic you can melt, you can destroy it and stuff, but plastic could never be a good currency because you can make it so easily, right? And everyone can make plastic, and so it's cheap to make. And so that's why you have to have something that's scarce, it's hard to come by. And these are physical commodities that we're talking about, but there's other currencies like fiat currencies where governments just make a currency and they say, okay, it's not backed by anything, it's just backed by the government itself. So the United States dollar, the dollar isn't, I mean, it's a piece of paper. You can barely use it for anything. I guess maybe you could light it on fire, I guess, if you had to, maybe to burn something. I don't know. You can't really use it for anything, though, aside from buying stuff. And the only reason for that is because the United States government backs it. It says it's backed by the United States Federal Reserve, and so people trust trust that in that dollar, that the government's not going to fall and that the government's going to protect the dollar and stuff like this. There's also Bitcoin. There's blockchain, which is Bitcoin uses blockchain, and so there's other currencies out there that we'll talk about. We'll talk about those in future episodes. But the main reason why I bring up currency though is because now most places they don't trade shells or rocks or even gold anymore. Gold we still use as a store of value, but most places aren't trading gold so much, right? It's not like you go to the store and you give them an ounce of gold or something like that. So gold is not really traded so much. It's kind of heavy. It's hard to transport and stuff, and so it's really not like, as far as like trading wise, it's not really used. Like you don't have gold bars in your pocket and stuff. And the whole thing with the gold standard too. We'll talk more about the gold standard in future episodes and stuff, and I'll tell you what I think about it and stuff like that. But anyhow, we'll talk about currency. We'll go much more into it late in other episodes. But the main reason why I brought up currency before is because the United States right now is the world's reserve currency, which means that the dollar is kind of like the most in-demand currency, right? It's the most stable one. It's not going to go high low. It's not going to go high down. It's relatively stable. It's backed by the United States, and so it's kind of in demand, and the United States buys a lot of stuff. They import a lot of products, so we ship dollars overseas a lot, and then those people overseas wind up investing back. They put those dollars back into the United States. A lot of times they buy treasury bonds and things like that. And that way they can keep their dollars, but they earn interest on their dollars. And so or they might buy American businesses or other American products and things like that. And so the dollar has been in demand, but this has been like a huge benefit for the United States because it's been able to set a lot of the rules. It says, okay, like if a country doesn't want to play by the American system, then America can basically shut them out of the dollar, like they did with Russia. I think it was in 2022 during the Ukraine war. The United States said to Russia, all right, we're going to shut you out. Any countries that trade with Russia, we're not going to let you trade with the United States. We're going to sanction this country. And what that did was, that's an unfortunate thing because now countries are getting a bit scared about the dollar. They're saying, well, if you're not in good line with the United States might cut you off from the dollar, in which case we're in trouble. We'll talk more about that stuff later, but so the United States has kind of weaponized the dollar, basically, and they've used it, if a country isn't doing things the United States likes, then the United States can sanction them, and they can say, okay, we're not going to let you use the dollar. We're not going to let you trade. If any other countries are trading with you, the bad country, then whatever bad country that the United States calls is bad, then the United States will say, well, you can't also trade with the United States if you trade with this country. And so you can't use the dollar. You can't use the United States banking system. And so the other countries say, well, we need to trade with the United States. It's a huge economy. We sell a lot of stuff to the United States. They're a huge importer. And so they say, well, we're not going to trade with these people then. We'll just, okay, fine. And so the United States gets to kind of shut people out. They get to use the dollar as kind of like a weapon. They get to say, like, this country is going to be basically blockaded economically. They won't be able to trade stuff with other people, with other countries. They won't be able to, prosper economically because they're not in line with the interests of the United States. And so anyhow, the United States has used the dollar as a weapon, and we'll talk much more about this in future episodes, but I wanted to bring that up because it kind of goes into the we were talking about geopolitics, and then we were going to talk about economics, and this kind of goes into the economy of the United States. When you think about the United States, when you talk about the United States economy, you first have to kind of start off with the dollar as being the reserve currency of the world, and the implications of that. And I know we're getting a bit late into the podcast, so I won't go too much more into it, but that's a huge factor of the American economic system and how the United States trades with other countries in the world. No other country has that status. Just the United States has the reserve currency right now. People don't, want to really hold the euro. People don't really want to hold the Chinese currency or the Russian currency or any of these other currencies. They want to hold the dollar, though, because the dollar is relatively stable. It holds its value relatively well. It doesn't have that much inflation, largely because the inflation is getting absorbed by other places in the world. Like I mentioned before, Argentina had hyperinflation. Like Argentina, they printed too much currency, right? And whenever you print too much currency, that's why a central bank can't just print currency and just give out tons and tons of money to everyone and think it's going to be okay. Because when you do that, that's causing inflation. You're causing all the prices to rise. Like if everyone has $10, if you have everyone in the town has $10, then you go to buy like a cheeseburger or something, or a vegan cheeseburger or whatever, and you buy it, and maybe it costs 50 cents for a cheeseburger, $1, whatever. I'm just giving rough numbers here, but say a cheeseburger costs $1. I don't know. Yeah, everyone in the town has $10. Cheeseburger costs $1. Okay, great. Well, if you gave everyone in the town instead of $10 each, everyone in the town gets $1,000 each. Well, now a cheeseburger is not going to be $1 anymore. A cheeseburger is going to go way up in price. It's going to be like $100 or whatever the number is. It's going to drastically rise as the currency rises. All the prices rise with it, and energy helps to do that too. There's a lot of other factors at play, but generally, when you inflate the money supply, you're inflating the prices of everything, and so over time, a lot of these Federal Reserves, they print money, and they print money, and they print money. And so what happens is over time, you inflate the currency, you devalue the currency, right? So I think it was like in 1913 when the Federal Reserve started or something like that. I don't know what the numbers are, but like a dollar was worth like so much in gold. I'm not sure what the number was. A dollar used to be, I think they pinned it at $35 for an ounce of gold or something. I forget what it was. But now over time, since that time, let's say 100 years, 100 whatever it is, 113 years or whatever that number is, the dollar has gone way down in value. So since 1913, the dollar I think has lost around 95 or something percent of its value, because the Federal Reserve has printed and printed and printed and printed, and you're creating more money and more money and more. And the more money that you create, the less the value of the money. Like I said before, if you only have $100 in circulation and everyone in the town has $10 or something like this, $10 is going to buy a lot of stuff, right? That's why a house used to be, $40,000 or something like that. A house used to be pretty cheap, relatively cheap, much more cheaper than it is now, relatively speaking. And now a house is $400,000, and that has largely to do with inflation. And so the United States has been able to do this because we've been able to print and print and print, because it's not, all that money is not staying in the United States. If all that money was staying in the United States, prices would be through the roof right now. Everything would be $1 million for this and $1 million for that. Everything would be crazy expensive. But all of our dollars have gone overseas, and so we haven't kept all of our dollars here. There's trillions of dollars in circulation, but we haven't kept them all here in the United States. We've let them kind of go out, and so it's sort of, the world has absorbed the inflation, right? Like they've taken a lot of the inflationary burden, and so we've been able to print a lot more than we normally would have if we kept all the dollars in the United States. If we printed the kind of money that we have printed in over the last 100 years, and it all stayed in the United States, a pen would be like $1,000 right now or something. But all this money has gone overseas, and so because it's being used by other countries and stuff, and some countries even use dollars to trade. Like some countries actually use the dollar to trade amongst themselves, like in individual countries. Sometimes you'll actually go to a country and they'll actually be trading in U.S. dollars, other countries in the world. And so you see that sometimes. And so some countries peg their currency to the dollar. The dollar is a very, it's kind of looked at in the world. Now it's losing that status now because of some of the moves that the United States is making, like such as sanctioning Russia and printing lots of money and doing foolish things with the dollar. It's lost a lot of its prestige and status and just usability in the world. But so there's lots of problems with it. But anyhow, what I'm trying to say though is, a country like Argentina, which printed a lot of money in the past, those Argentinian pesos didn't go all out throughout the world. They stayed in Argentina. And so because if you go to, like I said before in my example, if you go to Argentina, if you go to Egypt with Argentinian, I think it's pesos, I could have that wrong, but if you go with Argentinian currency to Egypt, no, you can't buy stuff with it, right? People are going to say, I can't use that because it's from Argentina. Like, currency is only valuable in the place that it's created and used. But the dollar is a bit different. The dollar, it's in demand all over the world. People use the dollar all over the world to buy oil, to keep as a store of value, to buy U.S. bonds. And so you can go to Egypt with the dollar and you probably use it, right? I mean, maybe not in a store, but you could maybe go to a bank and trade it for the Egyptian currency or whatever else. And I forget what that one's called. It's in the top of my. Ever have something on the tip of your tongue and you're forgetting the name of it? I forget what the lector? No, the Egyptian currency. I'm forgetting what. But Lynn Alden is one of my favorite economists. Yeah, she's amazing. She is just brilliant, and she talks about Egypt sometime and stuff like this. But anyways, we'll talk much more about currencies and things in future episodes. But I wanted to bring that up because the state of the United States right now is, we have the reserve currency, but it's steadily going down. People are getting off the dollar, and they're investing in things like gold, which holds its value a lot better. We'll talk in future episodes about why that is and stuff like that. Gold is a store of value, where if you have $1,000 today, in 5 years you're not going to have $1,000 anymore. It's going to be less than $1,000 because of inflation. Because the United States is printing money and printing money and printing money, and that $1,000 goes down and down and down. The inflation rate, they say it's like 2% or 3%. It's probably a lot higher than that, 5-10% or something. So every year you're losing, like, let's call it 7% of your money. So if you have $1,000, in a year you're going to have whatever that is less. If you're losing 7%, you're going to have 7% less that next year, and then after that you're going to have another 7% less. And so if you have $1,000 in the bank, every year you're losing 7%. It's going down and down and down and down and down because it's inflation. That's you're losing money every single year. Your currency becomes less and less and less valuable, less and less, and you can buy less and less with it. Whereas gold is the exact opposite a lot of the times. Gold goes up in value, up and up and up and up and up, and so. But compared to the dollar, it does, because the dollar is constantly going down and the gold's staying steady or maybe rising. And so gold is if you put $1,000 in gold, if you bought $1,000 worth of gold 100 years ago, you'd have that would be a good investment. But if you had $1,000 of dollars 100 years ago, you lost in that investment. And so we'll talk much more about that stuff in the future. But I wanted to bring that up because that is one of the main things about the United States economy. And the United States is over $38 trillion in debt. And so when you have this much debt, it's not a good thing. Right now we're spending more on interest on the debt than we are on the military, which is a bad thing. It's like a debt spiral. You're basically spending so much. It's like having a credit card, and every month you go to pay the bill, and the principal is so high that you wind up just paying interest the whole time, and so. You're not even paying off the actual bill itself. You're just paying interest. And that's kind of where the United States is now. And in 10 years, it's going to be, I think, 50 million or something. It's just going to go. I think in 25 years, it's expected to be over 100 trillion dollars in debt, the United States. And that's not only unsustainable, it means that basically the entire federal budget, which I think is around, don't quote me, I think the federal budget is between 4 to 6 trillion. What? Gosh, I know it's about a quarter military, quarter Social Security, quarter Medicaid, or maybe closer to about a third. And then there's discretionary spending. Let's call it discretionary, like another quarter. I forget the exact numbers of the federal budget, but let's call it I think it's like between 4 to 6 trillion, but I forget the exact number. But I should know that actually. I did know that before, but I'm not using any notes right now. I'm just kind of going off the top of my head. But let's call it a $4.5 trillion budget. That's a bit of a guess. But anyhow, right now the interest on this is actually more than the discretionary spending, I guess, would be less, because the interest right now is becoming one of the biggest things. The interest is becoming about a quarter of the budget itself. And so now we're spending more on interest than we are on the military. Soon we're going to be spending more on interest than we are on even on Social Security and things like that. So interest is a bad, it's a losing game. We're constantly going, the United States is constantly going further and further and further into debt, and the interest payments are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's not good. And some people say, oh no, it's okay, we can go further into debt. The United States has lots of assets. It's got the federal parks, it's got all the land, it's got lots of other things as far as assets go. No, you can't. We'll talk about how that doesn't add up, but basically this is an unsustainable, very dangerous situation, and the United States is at a chance they might default, they might do lots of bad things can happen. It's most likely just going to inflate the money away. Like, we're just going to have higher and higher inflation, which means that your dollars are going to lose more and more value. And so right now the economic situation in the United States is pretty dire in some ways. In some ways it's okay, but I don't want to talk too much more about it because I know we're getting kind of late into the podcast here. So I think I'll kind of what else? We're going to talk about UFOs and stuff. I don't want to go too much longer right now. I think what I'll do is we'll talk more about UFOs and more about the economy in episode 3. I will say a quick thing about UFOs. There is a group right now that holds the technology for UFOs, and these are wild instruments or wild vehicles. They can go really fast in the sky, and they can go underwater, and they can do circles around submarines, and it's a wild technology. And throughout the World War II, I think the Germans, they had what were called the Foo Fighters, right? They created these Nazi style tank looking like UFOs, and apparently they could go super fast and fly around and stuff. And I think that technology came to the United States. And I don't know how they got that technology. Some say it was through aliens and stuff like this. I'm not so sure about that. I think it might have been created by humans right around that time. I know that people like Tesla were creating similar devices and similar technologies and stuff. And anyhow, that technology came to the United States, and it basically went underground. It was at first part of the military, I think. And I don't have the story completely known, but apparently, from what I know, the technology was first part of the military, but then it kind of went rogue, and now it's kind of like a break off group. And they've throughout time, through over the last, let's say, 80 years or whatever it is, have kind of become like a breakout. I don't say breakout civilization, but they've become a group that has this breakout technology. So there's a group of humans, maybe of aliens as well. I don't know. I did go to a Stephen Greer CE5 contact, which we'll talk about. Maybe I'll talk about that next episode. We'll get more into UFOs. I went to a CE5, and that's when you actually contact the aliens yourself. And so we did that. We did a meditation, and we saw these things floating around in the sky, and like it was really wild. I was in California a couple of years back, but I'll talk about that next episode too. So, but anyhow, this group has this technology, and I believe they have many of these UFOs, we call them, I guess. That are capable of doing wild feats, just with flying around and stuff. And anyhow, there's a group in control of these. It may be multiple groups as well. I don't know all the details, but anyhow, there's a group that has this technology, and it's kind of like it's not any government. It's not any one government. It's like an international organization. And I think that they are very powerful right now. And there's a disclosure coming, and pretty soon I think we're going to start to learn more about. The public is going to start to learn more about these machines, because you see them flying around. The United States military has detected these hundreds and hundreds a year, if not thousands, who knows how many. But they see them flying around all the time, and they're like, what are those? And it's flying around super fast, and they see them on multiple radar systems. It's not like a guy with a cell phone being like, what's that in the sky? And he's got like a grainy video from his flip phone or something. This is like the U.S. military, like picking these up on multiple radar systems, and they're flying super fast and going all over the place, going underwater and stuff. And the conventional military is picking these up, and that's actually what got me into this subject in the first place. I found that the military was admitting that they were seeing these, and they had the congressional hearing a few years back, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're seeing these flying around." And pilots testified saying that they see these flying. They'll be in a plane or something, and they'll see these things buzzing around, and that got me interested. It got me thinking, okay, there's something out there, whether it's aliens or humans or what. There's something flying around, and it turns out that there's a group that has this technology, and it's kind of like a group that supersedes the government. I think they do get a lot of funding from the U.S. government, from the military, from maybe the black budget and things like that. But the president, I don't think is in control of it. I don't think any president is in control of it. And so maybe that's a good thing, though. Maybe we don't want the whims of the United States president in control of such technology that could maybe. I think these things can like fly to the moon in like a few seconds or something. Like they're amazing machines. But anyhow, we'll talk more about that in episode 3. I wanted to really go into it, but I'm just scratching the surface right now. And I'll talk about the alien side of it, and I'll talk about the different aspects of it and stuff. We'll talk about more about that in episode 3. And I'll go over way more into the economy episode 3 too. I'm gonna talk about taxes, how some people are paying over 50% in taxes when you add everything up, and in that case, you're kind of working for the government at that point. They're confiscating 50% of your wealth, and some people seem to think that's good. I'm not one of those people. I think taxes should be around 7% of your income, if that. I think you should pay almost nothing. I think we should, be able to keep the vast majority of our own money. But I'll talk more about that stuff. I'll talk about in the last episode I talked about how I'm not sure if I got the numbers right, but I think about 10% of the top earners pay about 80% of the taxes. I think it's about 20% of the earners. Sorry, I think the top 10%, pay about 70% of the taxes. The top 20% pay around, I think it's like 85% of the taxes. I got some notes here. And so you do have a lot of the high income earners, not capital gains. That's a different thing. We'll talk about that too. But capital gains is when you sell something like a house, you get money from that. And, and then you have to pay much lower taxes. That's different from the income tax brackets. And most people aren't millionaires every year. Like most people that make $1 million, the vast majority of them are self-made, first of all. And secondly, the vast majority of them don't make $1 million consistently every year. A lot of them people, when they are millionaires, they make $1 million because they sold a house or they had a great investment or they, something happened for them on a specific year. But most people don't consistently make $1 million. That's actually a pretty rare thing to be making like high income every single year like that. So that's a very small percentage of people who do that. But I don't think that the wealthy should have their should have their money confiscated either. I think everyone should be able to keep the vast majority of their money. That's a principle that I have. I think, some libertarians would say taxation is theft, and socialism, it's theft, and it's like government approved theft, essentially. That's like the argument. That's one of the things that libertarians would say. And they'd also say like socialism, it requires force because you have to use the government force to take that money from people to confiscate. Socialism is basically super high taxation, essentially. It's the government running things and the government taking the vast majority of people's wealth. And the argument for that is that the government can spend it in productive ways. But I don't see it that way. I think people should be able to keep their own money. I do think we should have a great government and we should use it as a great tool and we should build it and make it awesome and have a great society and build all the things that we want collectively. But I think that you should be able to keep the vast majority of the money that you make. And so I had a couple of notes there on my computer, but we'll talk much more about economics and UFOs and things like that later. Same thing with Tulum. I was going to tell a bunch of Tulum stories. I moved down here, I lived here for about 5 years, went to lots of fun things, cenotes. I think in episode 3, we'll talk about economics, we'll talk about the cenotes, we'll talk about the jungle parties. I won't get too much into the stories of Tulum right now, but maybe one quick story, because I did say we were going to tell Tulum stories. So let's see, I already talked about the cenotes. I talked a little bit about, I'm here in Bufo, by the way. This is a place that has wellness stuff. They have, you can take the frog venom here and you can go into a teepee and that blasts you into outer space and it's a super potent psychedelic and you can experience different realms of reality. So they have that here, but they also have you can take magic mushrooms here and you can go into a deprivation tank. They have that right over here. You can do other things too. I think they have ibogaine as well, which is another psychedelic. I took that one a few years back. That's, I think, from Africa, and that was a wild experience. But yeah, they have lots of different things like that here at Bufo. So this is a really cool place to come, and if you're wanting to go on like a wellness journey, you can come here. And what else about Tulum? I don't know. There's so many stories about Tulum. I'll talk about La Fuega. That was my little buggy that I had here. I'll tell many stories, but let's tell one more. This Honario, that's my favorite taco place. Let's tell one quick story though, because I did say that we were going to talk about Tulum. So I'll talk about radio next time. That's a place that I lived. Let's talk about I don't know. What's like a cool thing in Tulum that would be fun to talk about. Let's talk about one of my favorite places on the beach, Ikal. I'll talk about Ikal. That's one of my favorite places on the beach there. It's beautiful. It's all bohemian style. It's like made with like, bamboo and stuff like this. And they have a fire pit there that you can go. So if you're ever in Tulum and you want to go to a really awesome spot on the beach that like a lot of locals go to and stuff. I mean, it's very kind of nice. It's very kind of high end, I guess, but they're very also low key and down to earth as well. So you can go there and they actually have places that you can stay that you can kind of go up the ladder and you can kind of have like these, some of the bungalows there have like these sort of lookout perches where you can go up there and you can climb up on the stairs of the ladder and you can kind of see the sunset. You can kind of see over the jungle canopy and stuff. So you have some really cool things like that as well. In some of these in Ikal, that's a pretty sweet spot. But anyhow, they've got the fire pit there, so you can go and you can experience the fire pit. And I've had many great nights there around the fire pit, singing and dancing, and it's a very sacred type of thing. They have cacao ceremonies and sound baths and all that kind of stuff too. So it's a really sweet place, right on the beach there, right toward like the national park side, I guess. But anyways, we'll talk about more stuff about Tulum later on. I know we're kind of getting late into the podcast here, so I'll end things there. So rock and roll, everyone. Thank you for listening to the RaRa. Thank you for putting up with the technical difficulty when we were low on the battery there. And next time I want to make sure it's fully charged before we start. And I think it was mostly charged, but next time we're going to start fully charged. And future episodes, by the way, are only I'm going to try to keep them under an hour and 15. I feel like the last 2 episodes I've been going over. I've been talking about lots of different things, but I'm going to try to keep episodes around 115, maybe like 130 at like maybe 135 or something like that. I'm sure there'll be some that I go over that time, but we're going to mostly keep episodes like roughly around that time frame, so they're not super long. But anyways, thank you for listening to the RaRa. I will see you next Friday. Rock and roll, everybody. I'm going to go maybe get some food and maybe see who's around. I might go out for a drink tonight. I might also stay in and work. I have to work on my business, so I might just stay in and do that, but go out tomorrow night maybe. But we'll see how it goes. I think I've mostly mentioned most of the stuff, and all the other stuff we'll talk about next episode. So next episode will be coming also from Tulum. And cheers, everyone. Thank you for listening to the RaRa. Much love. If I said something that offended you, if you are from Ukraine or Russia or any of these places, and you're like, oh, I don't like something he said there, please don't hate me. Please don't want to take me out or something. Like, please. Yeah, I don't know. Rock, I hope the best for you, even if you don't agree with me in some ways or something. So yeah, yeah. Okay, everyone. See you soon. Much love. Cheers from Tulum.